My name is Emily. I'm 31 years old and I work as a benefits planner for a global life insurance company. Despite the decent pay, my job often takes me to various companies, providing ample opportunities to meet new people, including men. However, recently, one of these acquaintances put me through a terrible ordeal driven by his grief for money, ultimately ruining a significant milestone in my life. Today, I'd like to share the story of this unfortunate event. I lost both my parents in a car accident when I was in elementary school. Raised by my maternal grandparents, who didn't have much money, I attended local public schools throughout middle and high school. Despite their financial constraints, my grandparents took out loans so I could attend a somewhat expensive college. After securing a job, I took over the remaining debt, leaving me a bit financially strapped. It was during this time that I met David through a mutual work connection. Upon sharing my financial situation with him, David nervously laughed, revealing his own struggle with student loans. "I'm in a similar boat, still paying off student loans," he said. "So, we're the debt repayment couple, huh?" I replied, feeling an immediate connection. "Exactly," I said. "I'd love to be debt-free as soon as possible." During our time dating, I found immense happiness with David, despite our limited disposable income. Over the 3 years, David continued to excel in his career, earning promotions that improved our quality of life. As his income increased, so did our relationship's stability. I too intensified my efforts in debt repayment, not wanting to lag behind. David always had encouraging words for me, reminding me not to push myself too hard. "Emily, if you collapse, I'll be ruined too. You're the reason I can work hard like this." "Thank you," he'd say. I reciprocated his support, acknowledging that he was my source of motivation as well. We emotionally supported each other through the daily grind, finding fulfillment and purpose in our relationship. It was during this high point that David finally proposed, expressing his desire for us to be lifelong partners, supporting each other through thick and thin. Overjoyed, I accepted, looking forward to our future together. We decided to rent a new condo and move in together, both of us earning well. Our relationship only seemed to grow stronger, with David's parents welcoming me with open arms, thrilled to meet the woman their son had chosen, a beautiful and talented graduate from a reputable university. I recall feeling a mix of awkwardness and flattery as David's parents showered me with compliments. With no parents of my own and my grandparents, who raised me, now in a nursing home, I decided it was time for David to meet my high school best friend, Melissa. We arranged to meet at a cafe near Melissa's condo. "Nice to meet you, I'm David," he greeted her warmly. "Happy to finally meet you," Melissa replied with a smile. "Emily told me lots about you. Please take good care of her, she can be vulnerable at times." Though Melissa and I were the same age, she exuded stability and reliability. I had always looked up to her as a big sister figure, leaning on her for support when needed. A few months after this initial meeting, Melissa once again proved her unwavering support when a significant turning point came. Introducing David to my best friend went smoothly, and soon after, David and I began diving into wedding planning. However, David's work began demanding more of his time, often intruding on our plans. Even on days we had set aside for dress shopping, urgent calls would disrupt our schedule. "I have to work this weekend. I know it's a big day for us. I'm really sorry," David would apologize. Understanding his commitments, I reassured him, "It's okay. I'll try on the dresses, snap some pictures, and we can pick one later. Thank you for understanding." During this time, David was swamped with work, often having to work weekends and travel for business trips during the week. Left to handle much of the wedding planning on my own, juggling it with my job became exhausting. But despite the challenges, our hard work paid off. The ceremony and reception exceeded our expectations, with heartfelt speeches from Melissa and blessings from my grandparents, who sent their regards through a video message. As we bid farewell to the last of our guests, David and I finally found a moment to relax in the backstage room, basking in the joy of our special day. I still vividly recall the moment David's demeanor shifted, his casual demeanor abruptly interrupted by a surprised look upon checking his phone after our small talk. As he hastily excused himself from the table to take the call, I assumed it was work-related, not foreseeing the impending upheaval about to unfold in our lives. In the backyard of the venue, a steep staircase intended for staff caught my eye as I navigated the space in my gown. Oblivious to the distraction caused by someone calling from across the hallway, I found myself momentarily off guard. In an instant, my body was airborne, propelled through the air. a scream piercing the air as I collided with a powerful impact, engulfed by intense pain. As I lay in the hospital bed, bandages enveloping my arms and legs, bruises and scrapes marring my skin, I struggled to piece together the events leading to my current state. Miraculously, no bones were broken, but the contusions and bruises served as a painful reminder of the ordeal. The nurse's explanation offered little solace, merely confirming that I had tumbled down the venue's staircase. The details of the fall shrouded in mystery. Hours later, amidst the confusion and physical discomfort, another unexpected blow struck. David, who had entered my hospital room, delivered a devastating revelation, severing our relationship with callous finality. "You're useless to me now," he declared, thrusting a settlement of $30,000 towards me. Stunned and bewildered, I pleaded for an explanation, only to be met with a cold dismissal. "Just lie down and shut up. You'll only make your injuries worse," he retorted, callously disregarding my turmoil. The crushing realization dawned upon me as he callously confessed to finding another woman, leaving me reeling in disbelief and heartbreak. I'm marrying her." "Sorry, Emily." David's words hit me like a ton of bricks. The disbelief mingled with the sting of betrayal as I struggled to comprehend the gravity of his revelation. "Emily, are you kidding me? We just had our wedding ceremony, and now this." I protested, the weight of his confession crushing my spirit. "But we haven't filed the marriage certificate yet. I was waiting for our anniversary to file the paperwork," I pleaded, clinging to the sliver of hope that remained. As the realization sunk in, I realized it was indeed the right decision to delay filing. David's genuine happiness at the unexpected turn of events betrayed his indifference towards my injuries and suffering. "I'll give you all the wedding gifts as a get-well-soon present. Bye," he nonchalantly declared before leaving, his laughter echoing in the empty room. "Wait, David," I called out, desperation tainting my voice. But he didn't hear, the sound of his departing laughter haunting my thoughts. Tears streamed down my face as I clung to Melissa, pouring out my heartache and despair. "It's been so tough," I sobbed, recounting the ordeal to Melissa. "I'm furious that this happened to you, Emily. Focus on healing for now. I'll look for the culprit," Melissa reassured me, her support a lifeline amidst the chaos. "The culprit." "David," Melissa's words hung heavy in the air, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. "He was even laughing when I was waiting for you to change so we could leave together. Then ambulances showed up, and it was chaos. They said you'd have fallen down the stairs. That's when I saw it. As they were carrying you, he had this nasty smile on his face," she recounted, a chill running down my spine at the revelation. "Did David push me down the stairs? What could he possibly gain from it?" The questions gnawed at my mind, but I pushed them aside, focusing on healing, as Melissa advised. As my physical wounds began to heal, so did the wounds of my heart, transforming my sorrow into fierce anger. I couldn't rest until the responsible parties were held accountable. A few weeks later, armed with evidence and fueled by the thirst for justice, Melissa and I lured David to a cafe, ready for payback. Determined to seek justice, I confronted David, who appeared noticeably different from the man I once knew. His flamboyant attire and unfamiliar accessories spoke volumes about the changes in him. Despite his seemingly good mood, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease as he handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I inquired, eyeing the sack of cash within. "It's a get-well gift," he replied casually, his nonchalance grating on my nerves. "Good to see that both your scars and bruising have healed." "How generous of you," I retorted, unable to conceal my sarcasm. "Do tell, what brought this on? Why did you betray Emily?" I demanded, my anger simmering beneath the surface. David's smirk only intensified, sending a shiver down my spine. "Actually," he began, his tone dripping with arrogance, "the woman I've been seeing won $10 million in the lottery." $10 million? I exclaimed, disbelief washing over me. "So, what's $10,000 or $20,000 to me now?" he continued, his callousness leaving me speechless. It dawned on me that David had been involved with another woman even before we exchanged vows. She had struck it rich shortly after our wedding ceremony, prompting David to reconsider our marriage in favor of a new life with her. The revelation fueled the flames of revenge within me. "I can't forgive you," I declared, my voice trembling with fury. "I'll report you to the police." "Whoa there," David interjected, his tone suddenly grave. "Don't make it sound like I pushed you. There's no evidence." His words sent a chill down my spine, reminding me of the uphill battle we faced in proving his guilt. True, I conceded, recalling the staff's testimony of my supposed slip and fall. But they only reported what they saw. Melissa had done her own in-depth investigation. I'm really sorry for the trouble I've caused. He was blinded by the $10 million too, Rebecca said, her voice trembling with guilt. Her tearful confession was heart-wrenching, and I couldn't help but believe her sincerity. After apologizing profusely, she quietly disappeared without saying a word to David. Several weeks later, I received a desperate call from David, asking to meet and talk. When I saw him again, he was much more modestly dressed than before, a stark contrast to his previous flamboyance. I can't get in touch with Rebecca. Do you know where she is? He asked, his voice filled with anxiety. Why would I know where your $10 million lady is? I replied, my tone cold. Right? Listen, Emily, I've given you a total of $40,000, right? No, it's actually $60,000, including the compensation. I corrected him. Is that so? I hardly remember. Can you return half of that money, or even just $10,000? He pleaded. No, but I do have some valuable information for you. Information. David's curiosity was piqued. Yes, information that's quite important for you, I said, taking out my mobile phone. I played a pre-recorded video, and David's eyes widened in disbelief as Rebecca appeared on the screen. David, I have to apologize to you. I'm really sorry. The story about me winning $10 million in the lottery was a lie. I lied because I couldn't bear the thought of you marrying someone else, she confessed. I'm truly sorry. I just apologized to Emily as well. I plan to disappear from this town, and I can't tell you where I'm going. I'm really sorry for ruining both of your lives. David was stunned into silence, his shock palpable. The weight of his actions and the truth of Rebecca's deceit left him speechless. Pushing his spouse down the stairs for a non-existent $10 million, being fooled by a lie, impulsively committing a crime, and losing $60,000 in the process, his pathetic reality was laid bare. I left David as he was, head down and immobile, overwhelmed by the consequences of his actions and the ruin of his own making. I walked out of the cafe, gripping the receipt tightly. A few days after that encounter, my phone buzzed again. Another call from David. I've come to my senses. I was wrong. Can we start over? He pleaded. You've got some nerve spouting lines like that, especially after you mess up a chapter of my life, I retorted. The real culprit here is Rebecca for lying to me. If she hadn't lied, so you wouldn't have pushed me down the stairs, blinded by greed. I cut him off. Cut it out. You were already the worst when you cheated on me. Who would give a man like you a second chance? Those $10 million from Rebecca exposed the real David. In that sense, I could almost thank her. Her lie saved me from wasting my life on a worthless man. David tried to keep the conversation going, desperate to keep me on the line. It was a pathetic and futile struggle. I ended the call, feeling like I was pushing away someone who was desperately chasing after me. David had quit his job long ago, banking on Rebecca's $10 million lie. Now, it seemed he had to find new work. Melissa told me this as we shared drinks at my place over the weekend. She'd run into David in town and heard it straight from him. He can't get steady work because of his criminal record. Last I saw him, he was delivering food on a bike, she said. So he's doing delivery? Sounds like gig work, I mused. Seems that way. He's doing whatever he can find, Melissa replied, sharing some of David's job-hopping history. Traffic control for road work, janitorial services, lunchbox factory staff, warehouse worker. He looked worn out, all tan and sunburned, she added. It was clear that David's life had taken a downward spiral, a stark contrast to the bright future he once envisioned. This is karma for betraying Emily, I told David, and he nodded, understanding the gravity of his actions. If he's aware, that's good. I hope he continues to repent for the rest of his life. Would you consider starting over with him if the chance came? Melissa asked. No way. A man who would push a bride down the stairs in her wedding dress. Are you kidding? I replied. Melissa and I laughed heartily at the absurdity of the idea. Even if he threw $10 million my way, I'd still decline. A few days later, David contacted me again. Can you lend me $100? I'm really struggling here, he pleaded. No way. Please don't contact me again. And no following me. If you do, I'm going to the police. Wait, Emily, I'm really sorry, he tried again. Don't you dare call me by my first name, I snapped, hanging up and immediately blocking his number. If he crosses a line, I have no problem reporting him. Since parting ways with David, my life has been smooth. I got a good settlement, and he even paid for the venue. My grandparents in the nursing home and my coworkers all sympathize with me, which is to be expected. Anyone would feel sorry for a bride betrayed right after her wedding. But I'm not overly pessimistic about my current situation. My career is thriving and my personal life is fulfilling. Melissa and I are even thinking of going to a singles event. Having a divorce history isn't going to hold me back. I'm strong enough to make my fall down the stairs a talking point. Life has so much more in store, and I'm determined to find someone amazing and build a happy home.
When I was little, my mom used to tell me stories about my grandpa, how he started with nothing and built a business that could have set us up for life. But we never saw a dime of it. I didn't really get why until I was older and could understand the mess about his will and all. "Eliza, your grandpa was a tough nut," my mom said one chilly evening. We were sitting at our small kitchen table, nursing cups of lukewarm tea. The heater was busted again, and the landlord wasn't too quick to fix anything. He believed only in money earned, not given. "Why did he cut us off then? Didn't he think you'd manage his money right?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Mom sighed, her eyes tracing the steam rising from her cup. "It wasn't about me managing it. He had this crazy idea. Made a will that only gave his fortune to someone who made it big on their own, $500,000 at least in their business. That's just cruel," I muttered. The idea seemed ludicrous, a game set by a man who loved his money more than his family. "It was his way or the highway," Mom continued. "When I argued with him, he practically disowned me. Said if I was any good, I'd earn my way without his help. The unfairness of it all gnawed at me. Here we were, scrimping and saving every dime, while someone out there was living it up on what should have been ours. Ever since I was a kid, I had a knack for spotting a chance to make a buck. I'd set up a lemonade stand at the local golf course on sweltering summer days. 50 cents a cup. I'd holler, waving to the thirsty golfers. They couldn't resist the pitch from a freckle-faced kid with a pitcher. "You sure know how to hustle, kiddo," an old golfer named Hank once told me, chuckling as he handed over his change. "Keep that up, and you'll be a tycoon one day." I grinned, pocketing the coins. Just saving up for something big, I'd say, my mind always on the next big thing. And it wasn't just lemonade. I made homemade baubles and bracelets, stringing them together from beads I'd find at the dollar store. I sold them wherever I could, neighborhood block parties, school events, even at the front yard during garage sales. Trading wasn't just fun, it felt right, like I was meant to do it. "Eliza's got her own little business empire going," my mom would joke to her friends, but there was a hint of pride in her voice that made me stand a little taller. But it was the sewing that really caught on. When I managed to buy that old sewing machine from a garage sale, it was like all my Christmases had come at once. Teaching myself to sew wasn't easy. The machine was temperamental, and the tutorials online weren't always clear, especially when the internet connection flickered in and out. But I stuck with it. Soon, I was turning drab thrift store finds into trendy outfits. "Eliza, is that the same shirt you wore last week?" Sarah sneered one day as she caught me at my locker. "Looks different." "Yep, gave it a little makeover," I said casually, slamming my locker shut. "You should try it sometime, might improve your attitude." She scoffed and strutted away, but a couple of other girls lingered. "That was really cool what you did with your shirt. Could you do mine?" one of them asked, a shy smile playing on her lips. "Sure thing. Bring it tomorrow," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Word got around, and soon I was taking custom orders. It wasn't just pocket money anymore, it was real business. People paid good money for uniqueness, and I was all too happy to provide. One sunny afternoon, I dragged my latest creations to the local street fair. I set up a rickety table, laid out my garments, and waited, heart thumping with the thrill of it all. "You think people will buy these?" Mike, my friend, asked, eyeing the passers-by skeptically. They'd be crazy not to. I shot back, confidence bubbling. And by they did. My table was swarmed. I barely had time to collect the money and hand over the clothes. Amidst the chaos, a guy approached, his car keys jangling in his hand. Hey, my car broke down a block from here. Saw your stall. This stuff yours? He asked, nodding towards my makeshift display. Yeah, all made by me. You need something to pass the time while waiting for a tow? I joked, handing him a shirt. He laughed, a genuine, head-thrown-back kind of laugh. Actually, I was wondering if you do men's stuff too. Sure do. I replied, pulling out a few pieces I'd experimented with. He looked them over, then looked at me with a spark of interest. You've got talent. Ever think of making this a real business? Every day, I said, not missing a beat. His smile widened. I'm Jack, by the way. Eliza, I said, shaking his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another sale. This felt like a doorway, swinging wide open. As the day wound down, I counted the cash, a sense of accomplishment washing over me. This was it. I was making it happen, one stitch at a time. Told you they'd love your stuff, Mike said as he helped me pack up. Yes, you were right, I admitted, unable to keep the grin off my face. Looks like I might just make that $500,000 mark after all. After Jack and I met at the fair, things kicked off faster than I expected. He wasn't like the guys I knew, he came from money, but he had a way of making you forget about that when you were with him. He had this laid-back vibe, always laughing, always making plans. We started seeing each other more, and it wasn't long before we were seriously dating. One day he said, Eliza, I think it's time you met my parents. The thought alone made my stomach churn. I knew his folks came from old money, the kind that looked down on people like me. Are you sure? I asked, my voice tense. I don't think they'll like me much. Jack laughed it off. They'll love you. Don't worry so much. The drive over to Jack's parents' house felt like the longest ride of my life. Jack kept talking about mundane stuff, probably trying to ease the tension, but my stomach was in knots. We turned into a long driveway, and there it was, a massive house that looked more like a museum than a home. We walked up to the grand entrance, and the door swung open before we could even knock. There stood Jack's mom, Mrs. Thompson, dressed impeccably in a way that made me feel underdressed instantly, despite my careful choice of outfit. Jack, darling, she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug, then turned to me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. And you must be Eliza. We've heard so much about you. Her words sounded warm, but her tone was anything but. I forced a smile. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Thompson. Jack led me inside, and that's when Mr. Thompson appeared. He was a tall, stern-looking man with a firm handshake that felt more like a test than a greeting. Eliza, a pleasure, he said, his voice deep and unemotional. We moved into the living room, which was as grand and cold as the rest of the house. Everything felt stiff and formal. We made small talk, or at least, they did. I mostly nodded and smiled, feeling out of my depth. Dinner was served in a dining room straight out of a magazine, with crystal and fine china that looked like it should be locked up in a display case, not used for eating. We sat down, and that's when the real interrogation began. So, Eliza, Jack tells us you're into fashion design, Mr. Thompson began, eyeing me like I was a problem he needed to figure out. Yes, I run a small business. I design and sell clothing, I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Self-made then. How entrepreneurial, he commented dryly. His tone suggested it was less of a compliment and more a checkmark on a list of curiosities. Mrs. Thompson chimed in with a smile that felt more like a wince. And your family, dear, what do they do? Well, it's just me and my mom. She's a nurse, I said, feeling the weight of each word. Oh, I see. Mrs. Thompson replied, exchanging a glance with her husband that I couldn't quite read. The conversation stumbled along until coffee was served. and then Mrs. Thompson's polite mask slipped. "Eliza, I must be honest. We have certain hopes for Jack, and his partner's background is important to us. It's essential for maintaining the family's reputation and legacy." Finally, she put her fork down and said flatly, "Well, it's clear you've done quite a bit despite your background. But I don't think you're suitable for our son, I'm afraid." Her words hit like a slap. I sat there, stunned, as she got up from the table. "I won't waste more time here," she declared and left the room without another word. Jack was quick to comfort me, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Eliza, please, don't take it to heart. She said in her ways. It was tough to swallow. The evening had turned into a stark display of where I stood with his family. Despite Jack's reassurances, the shadow of that dinner lingered, casting a long, cold shadow over what should have been a happy milestone. The engagement happened despite the frosty atmosphere at dinner that night at Jack's parents' house. His folks made it clear they weren't thrilled, but Jack went ahead with the proposal. We were officially engaged, and while I was over the moon about us, the chill from his parents was something I couldn't shake off. A few weeks after our engagement, I got a call from Mrs. Thompson, Jack's mom. Her voice was formal. "Icy. Eliza, I'd like you to come over. We need to discuss something important." When I arrived, both of Jack's parents were waiting. The house felt colder than ever, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. Mrs. Thompson didn't waste any time. "Eliza, we've looked into your background thoroughly," she began, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. Mr. Thompson nodded, his face stern. "It's clear you come from a very different world than ours." His wife continued. "And frankly, we feel you're hunting for wealth, climbing through our son. But we won't allow our family fortune to be jeopardized." The words stung, but before I could react, Mrs. Thompson slid a stack of papers across the table towards me. "Since I can't convince Jack to rethink this marriage, you'll need to sign these," she said flatly. I picked up the papers. They were a prenuptial agreement. As I read through, it was clear, I wouldn't lay claim to any of Jack's wealth, and neither would any children we might have. Without hesitating, I signed them. "I'm not marrying Jack for his money," I said, handing the signed papers back to her. Mrs. Thompson looked taken aback, her eyes wide. Even Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, surprised by my quick compliance. I left their house feeling a mix of relief and resentment. At home, I told Jack everything. He laughed it off. "Wow, you really showed them. Good for you." But his laughter didn't sit right with me. "Aren't you bothered that your mom thinks so lowly of me? She humiliated me, Jack." He shrugged, still smiling. "I get why you're upset, but you know how Mom is. She has her reasons, and well, she's not completely wrong to worry, right?" His words felt like a slap. Not only had his mother insulted me, but now Jack was subtly defending her. It hurt, realizing that maybe he wasn't entirely in my corner. A year after our engagement, as the wedding drew closer, my life was a whirlwind of excitement and stress. My business, a sportswear brand I had started from scratch, was finally taking off. It was thrilling to see my designs being worn and loved. I had built a small capital, enough to expand and take on bigger challenges. As for the wedding, I wanted something simple, intimate. But Jack had other ideas. He dreamed of a lavish celebration. "Eliza, we're only doing this once. Let's make it big," he'd say with that grin that made it hard to argue. So, I agreed, and we planned a grand event. I found myself splitting the bill for a grand venue, exquisite catering, and a band that could keep our guests dancing all night. I managed to snag some deals, haggling discounts wherever I could. Old habits die hard. The wedding day was perfect, at least on the surface. Our guests seemed to have the time of their lives, and Jack and I couldn't stop smiling. We were floating, caught up in a bubble of joy. But not everyone was caught up in the festivity. Throughout the evening, I caught Jack's parents whispering, their faces pinched with disapproval. His mother, ever the social butterfly, floated around the room, dropping hints about her worries that I was after their family wealth. I overheard her telling a group of relatives, "It's all very extravagant, isn't it? I just hope she understands the value of money, not just spending it." Her voice was loud enough to carry, and her words stung more than I expected. After the wedding, things didn't settle down. Jack's mom posted on social media, lamenting that Jack had married someone like me. She wrote about her fear of losing her son to a woman who, in her eyes, wasn't worthy. Reading those words hurt. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes burn, not just with sadness, but with frustration. I tried to talk to Jack about it. "Your mom's posts, they're really harsh. Can you talk to them? They don't even know about the business, how well it's doing." Jack sighed, his face troubled. "Eliza, I know it's tough, but let's not rock the boat, okay? My parents, it's just how they are. But they think I'm some gold digger, Jack. They don't see that I don't need their money." He pulled me close, his voice soothing. I know. But let's just ignore it for now. They'll come around. They just need time to see what I see." I nodded, not convinced, but exhausted from the argument. I agreed to let it go, not because I thought he was right, but because I was too tired to fight. It was easier to focus on my business, pouring my energy into something positive, something that was mine. Despite the personal turmoil, my business kept growing. Orders poured in, and my brand gained a following. I was doing interviews, photo shoots, and even talking about partnerships. My days were packed, and I thrived on the hustle. The evening of the charity dinner arrived, and it was held at a swanky hotel downtown. The event was all about supporting sports programs for kids and teenagers. As the main costume designer, I had decided on a blue and white theme that matched not just the decor, but some of the latest pieces from my sportswear line. Jack and I walked into the grand hall, a room buzzing with well-dressed guests and shimmering lights. I was nervous, but excited to see my designs showcased in such a grand setting. That excitement quickly soured when we spotted his parents across the room. Their cold stares cut right through the warmth of the bustling crowd. Jack noticed but said nothing, and their blatant disregard stung me deeply, but I bit my lip and kept walking. As guests began to arrive, I circulated the room, chatting and networking. Jack was by my side, his usual charming self, but I could tell he was a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the event. "You're really pulling out all the stops, huh?" Jack commented as we watched the crowd from a distance. "Go big or go home, right?" I replied with a wink. "Eliza, you've outdone yourself," a familiar voice said from behind me. Turning around, I saw a local sports celebrity who'd worn my designs before. "These uniforms are fantastic. Thanks so much. Enjoy the evening," I smiled, handing them a business card. "Let's catch up soon." The event was buzzing, the atmosphere electric with enthusiasm and goodwill. Then, the moment of truth arrived. The host took to the stage to thank the sponsors, and my heart raced as he started to speak. We hadn't been seated long when the evening's presenter took the stage to kick off the event. The atmosphere was lively, filled with applause and cheer until it came time to thank the sponsors. My heart raced with pride and anxiety as my name was announced as one of the main contributors. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Eliza, whose generous donation of over $300,000 made tonight possible. The presenter boomed through the microphone. The room erupted in applause, but it was abruptly pierced by a shriek from Mrs. Thompson, Jack's mother. "Absolutely not," she screamed, drawing the room into a shocked silence. She demanded a microphone, and once it was handed to her, she didn't hesitate. "This is preposterous. Eliza couldn't possibly afford this. She's nothing but a poor beggar using my son's money. She's a cunning predator, sneaking into our family to bankrupt us." Her words echoed through the hall, venomous and loud. The presenter, taken aback but composed, quickly tried to correct the situation. "Mrs. Thompson, I assure you, you are mistaken. Eliza's company is extremely successful and fully capable of such generosity. I know this firsthand. The crowd murmured, the tension palpable. Then, in an unexpected move, the presenter passed the microphone to Jack, hoping for him to clear the air. Jack's face was a mix of embarrassment and conflict. He glanced at his parents, then at me, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke into the mic. I have nothing to say. And with that, he walked over to his parents, leaving me standing alone amidst a sea of whispers. The weight of the moment settled heavy on my shoulders. I felt exposed and humiliated, not just by the accusations, but by Jack's refusal to defend me, to affirm the truth about my success. The pride I had felt in my contribution was tarnished, overshadowed by the drama unfolding around me. Stepping into the spotlight, I approached the microphone, my heart pounding, but my resolve clear. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I started, my voice steady, despite the tumult of emotions. Tonight, I'd like to share something very personal about my journey. The room fell silent, all attention on me. I started as a street entrepreneur, not just to make ends meet, but driven by a dream. That dream led to the creation of a sportswear brand that many of you know now. Pausing, I looked around, meeting the eyes of young athletes and seasoned businessmen alike. When my company's profits hit $500,000, I fulfilled a promise to a very special person, my grandfather. I continued, my voice growing stronger. He left a will stating that his inheritance would go to a relative who made their own success, reaching that exact figure in their business. Whispers filled the hall, and I took a moment to let that sink in. That inheritance has been used to fuel not just my personal growth, but to give back through charity, much like tonight's event. The crowd was listening, some nodding, as I unfolded more of my story. After the pandemic, my business didn't just survive, it thrived, growing several times over. Every challenge faced was a stepping stone. As I concluded, I stand before you, not just as a business owner, but as someone who believes in the power of perseverance and dedication. The room erupted into applause, some guests standing in ovation. I scanned the crowd, seeing faces light up with respect and admiration, but my eyes briefly caught Jack's parents. Their expressions, once haughty, now showed disbelief and embarrassment. They quietly exited the hotel. Jack, looking equally shaken, tried to approach me, muttering an apology. Eliza, I just shook my head and walked past him, my emotions a mix of triumph and heartache. I needed space, not just from the evening's drama, but from everything. I decided to stay at the hotel that night, alone with my thoughts. Later, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was thick with emotion. Honey, I saw everything. I just want you to know how proud I am. To see you stand up there, telling your story, reclaiming your truth, you're everything I hoped you'd be. After spending a night at the hotel, to clear my head, I returned home. The place felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves held the tension from the last few months. Jack was there, waiting. As soon as he saw me, he tried to apologize again. Eliza, I'm so sorry about everything. Can we just forget all this and start over? He pleaded, his voice desperate. I shook my head, the decision heavy on my heart, but clear in my mind. Jack, I can't. I don't want to be with someone who can't stand up for me, who sides with his parents over his wife. It's not just about last night. This has been building for a long time. His face fell, and he reached out, but I stepped back. I'm filing for divorce, I said firmly. I didn't wait for his response. I gathered a few essentials and left for my mother's house, the one I recently bought with the inheritance from my grandfather. It felt like a sanctuary after the storm I'd walked through. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. Thanks to the prenup we had signed, and with no children to consider, it was over quickly. During that time, Jack's parents tried to intervene. They called repeatedly, trying to patch things up, not for my sake, but because their son's lifestyle had changed now that I was out of the picture. I blocked their numbers. It wasn't just to silence the constant ringing, but to cut off a past that was holding me back. Through friends, I heard Jack started drinking, lost his job, and eventually, his parents disowned him, not wanting to tarnish their reputation with his downward spiral. I felt a pang of sorrow for him. Despite everything, I never wished him ill. But I knew I needed to move on. I couldn't dwell on what had been, only on what could be. Living at my mom's place gave me the peace I needed to think about my next steps. The business was still thriving, and I poured more of myself into it, not just to distract from the divorce, but to rebuild stronger foundations for my future. One evening, sitting in the garden my mom and I had started together, she turned to me, a soft smile on her face. "You did the right thing, Eliza. It's tough, but you're tougher. And I'm here, always." "Thanks, Mom. I know. It's just a lot to process," I replied, feeling the weight of her support. "As long as you remember that you're not just surviving, you're building, learning, and growing. That's what matters," she said, squeezing my hand. She was right. The end of my marriage wasn't just an ending. It was a gateway to a new chapter. One where I could make decisions without second-guessing if someone had my back. One where I could stand on my own, not just as a successful businesswoman, but as a person reshaped by her experiences. My name is Sheila, and if there's one thing you should know about me right off the bat, it's that I grew up surrounded by books. More than just stacks of them at home, my dad managed a big publishing house, and ever since I was a little girl, I'd tag along with him to work whenever I got the chance. "Got your nose stuck in a book again?" Dad would joke every time he found me curled up in some corner of his office, deep into whatever I could get my hands on. "Yeah, and I bet I can read more books than you this month." I'd shoot back, always ready for a challenge. Those days at his office, I wasn't just reading, I was living in worlds crafted by imagination. It was magical, really. When I wasn't reading, I was watching Dad in meetings, seeing how he dealt with writers, illustrators, and all the big shots who thought they knew better. He handled it all with a kind of cool that made everyone respect him, but never made him unapproachable. I took the love for books straight into adulthood, became a teacher, shaping young minds to hopefully find the same joy in reading that I did. And every last Friday of the month, I kept up the ritual of visiting Dad at work. It was one of those Fridays when life decided to throw me a curveball. Dad introduced me to Ben, a lanky guy with an awkward smile and an armful of manuscripts. He was there to pitch his latest book, hoping Dad would bite. "Ben, this is my daughter, Sheila." "Sheila, Ben's a budding writer, got some interesting ideas," Dad said, clapping him on the back. Ben extended a shaky hand, which I took, smiling. "Nice to meet you, Sheila. Your dad tells me you're the real critic around here. Hope you won't be too harsh on me." I laughed. "I'll try to go easy on you. What's your book about?" We hit it off from there. Turned out, Ben was funny, a bit rough around the edges, but he had an honest charm about him. His stories weren't bad either, just a little unpolished. Dad saw potential in him, and after a year of him courting me with quaint coffee shop dates and midnight walks, talking about everything from Play-Doh to the best pie in town, we decided to get married. The wedding was a simple affair, just close family and friends. Dad was beaming all day, and when it came time for speeches, he stood up, glass in hand, a twinkle in his eye that I knew meant he was going to embarrass me. "Sheila, ever since you were a little girl, you've always surprised me. Smart, beautiful, and stubborn as a mule. And now, you've gone and married this young man who seems to love you more than his manuscripts." Everyone chuckled as Ben blushed, looking at me like I was his anchor. To Sheila and Ben, may your lives be filled with more love than there are books in my office, and that's saying something, Dad concluded, raising his glass. Life with Ben started like a fairy tale, but fairy tales don't tell you about the bills and the late nights worrying about how to make ends meet. Ben's books weren't exactly flying off the shelves, and as much as I believed in his talent, the world didn't seem ready to bite. I upped my hours at school, took on extra classes, and even ran after-school clubs. Anything to keep us afloat. "Hey, I picked up an extra shift at the tutoring center," I mentioned one evening, stirring a pot of spaghetti, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. Ben was at the table, paper spread out like a wild sea of ink and frustration. He looked up, his eyes tired but grateful. "Babe, you're killing yourself with all this work. Maybe I should get a regular job, put writing on hold for a bit." I walked over, took his hand, feeling the rough edges of his fingers worn by endless writing. "No, you're going to crack it, I know it. We just need to keep at it a bit longer, okay? Your stories are good, they just need the right eyes." He squeezed my hand, a silent thank you hanging between us. That night we ate dinner late, talking about his latest manuscript that just couldn't find a home. One day, Dad dropped by, something that wasn't unusual, but the look on his face was. He had that "I've got an idea" expression that usually meant things were about to get interesting. "Ben, have you ever thought about writing for kids? I mean, Sheila here has all the inside scoop, spending her days with them. Might be something to think about," Dad suggested, casually flipping through one of Ben's rejected manuscripts. Ben looked over at me, eyebrows raised. "Kids, huh? What do you think? Could I do it?" I nodded, excitement bubbling up. "Absolutely, you could. I can tell you what they like, what stories stick. We could try it together?" So, we did. Nights became our brainstorming sessions. I'd come home with tales from school, what the kids laughed at, what games they played, and Ben would weave them into stories. It felt right, working together, creating worlds for children who were so much like my students. The days rolled into months, and our first children's book took shape, a story about a mischievous raccoon with a heart of gold. Dad was instrumental, giving us tips on how to market it, how to pitch it to his contacts. When we finally got a publishing deal, it felt like we'd won the lottery. "Here's to Rocky Raccoon, may he be the first of many," Ben toasted, holding up his beer one night in our little kitchen that suddenly seemed too small for our growing dreams. "To Rocky," I echoed, my heart full, thinking maybe, just maybe, we'd turned a corner. Rocky Raccoon was just the beginning. After the first book hit the shelves and kids went nuts for it, Ben and I knew we had something special. We buckled down, turning out stories faster than you'd believe. Our little office at home became a workshop of dreams, paper everywhere, ideas scrawled on walls, and endless cups of coffee. One evening, as we were knee-deep in our third book, Ben tossed his pen down and stretched. "Can you believe this, Sheila? From barely paying the bills to signing autographs at book fairs. It's nuts." I laughed, tossing a crumpled paper ball at him. "We're not quite J.K. Rowling yet, but yeah, it's wild. Kids are actually dressing up as our characters for Halloween." Ben picked up the paper ball, shot a grin at me, and threw it back. "And to think, all this started with your idea to write for kids. You were right on the money." As our fame grew, so did the opportunities. Invitations to schools, interviews, even a TV spot. I was teaching less and writing more, which was a dream come true in its own way. Dad was over the moon, always bragging to anyone who'd listen. "Ben and Sheila, the dynamic duo. You guys are smashing it," Dad said one day, dropping by with a new contract from a big-name publisher. "They want a series, can you believe it? A whole series based on your characters." Ben, who was usually the cool one, nearly jumped out of his chair. "A series? That's big league, baby. Sheila, we've hit the jackpot." As our book series took off, our lives changed in ways we'd never imagined. We bought a new house with more space for our work, and every room felt like a piece of our success. Celebrations were frequent, with friends and family always eager to toast to our success. At one particularly lively party, with our closest friends raising glasses in our new living room, I took a moment to watch Ben, laughing and sharing stories. I felt a mix of pride and a twinge of fear. Were we ready for all this change? "Hey, you okay?" Ben noticed my quiet moment and sidled up beside me. "Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? But good. Really good." I smiled, leaning into his side. He kissed my forehead, wrapping an arm around me. "It's more than good. It's everything we dreamed of. And I couldn't have done any of this without you, Sheila." Life got even more hectic, but in a way that made every busy moment worth it. Soon enough, I was cradling our newborn son, deciding to step away from teaching to focus on our family. With Ben's writing now more than enough to support us comfortably, I threw myself into being a mom and a collaborator on each new book. Even though I wasn't in the classroom, I kept my hand in education by channeling what I knew about kids into our stories. "Look at us, huh?" I said to Ben one night as we looked over our latest manuscript, the baby asleep in the next room. "Making books and raising a little boy. I think we're kind of superheroes." Ben laughed, pulling me close. "Yeah, superheroes who deal in diapers and dialogues. But I wouldn't have it any other way." The evening of Dad's 70th birthday was supposed to be a grand celebration, and it was. Held in one of the big fancy restaurants downtown with a buffet where everyone seemed to mingle effortlessly, except me, perhaps. As the night unfolded with laughter and the clinking of glasses, I couldn't help but notice Ben. He seemed unusually occupied, not with me or our son Jamie, who was now 17 and more into his phone than the party, but with a young woman whose laughter seemed a bit too loud, even over the buzz of party chatter. They were tucked away at a corner table, heads close, talking animatedly. Something inside me tightened. I tried to focus on my dad, who was busy being the life of the party, but my eyes kept darting back to Ben. Finally, I pulled Dad aside during a quieter moment. "Dad, who's that woman with Ben?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice betrayed a tinge of concern. "Oh, her?" Dad glanced over, following my gaze. "That's Lisa, the assistant editor at the publishing house. She's been working closely with Ben on his latest project." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. They seemed to be getting along well. Dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "It's all professional, honey. You know how these events are, just shop talk and networking." His tone was dismissive, but it did little to ease the nagging doubt in my heart. Pushing down the jealousy that bubbled up, I plastered a smile on my face and returned to the festivities. Relatives and important guests came over to congratulate Dad, pulling me into conversations and away from my spiraling thoughts. As the evening wore on, I found myself watching Ben and Lisa from across the room. They were laughing again, their heads tilted together in a way that looked far too intimate for a simple work discussion. Each laugh, each shared glance between them felt like a small puncture to my heart. "Let's get some fresh air," I suggested to Jamie, needing an escape from the stifling atmosphere. Outside, the cool night air felt like a balm. Jamie and I leaned against the railing, overlooking the city lights. He talked about school, his friends, and his plans for college, normal things that felt grounding in that moment. "Thanks for being here with me, Jamie. I needed this," I told him as we headed back inside. "Anytime, Mom. You know I've got your back," he replied, bumping his shoulder against mine playfully. We re-entered the party, my resolve strengthened. I would enjoy the evening for Dad's sake, for Jamie's. As for Ben and whatever was happening there, I would deal with it later, when the music stopped and the guests went home. After returning from some fresh air with Jamie, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. As much as I tried to focus on the celebration, my eyes inevitably wandered to where Ben was still chatting animatedly with Lisa. It was like watching a play where you already knew the tragic ending, but you couldn't leave your seat. Determined not to let this spoil the entire evening, I tried to mingle. Yet, every laugh and snippet of music seemed to echo with underlying tension for me. Finally, I decided to head to the ladies' room to freshen up, perhaps clear my head. That's when it happened. As I walked down the quiet hallway towards the restrooms, the muffled sound of voices stopped me dead in my tracks. The door to one of the private dining rooms was ajar, and through the crack, I saw Ben and Lisa. They weren't just talking, they were in an embrace, kissing like two teenagers, hidden away from prying eyes. My heart hammered against my chest so hard I thought it might burst. Anger, shock, and a profound sense of betrayal swirled inside me. I felt rooted to the spot, hidden by the shadow of a decorative plant. Just then, their conversation floated out, clear and sharp. We need to figure this out, Ben. Once your book launches, we'll have enough to start fresh. Just you and me, Lisa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ben's reply was a low murmur, but his words were like daggers. I know. I just need a bit more time to sort things out with Sheila. It's complicated with Jamie and everything. The cold reality of their plans hit me hard. I was supposed to be his partner, his wife, yet here he was, planning a future with someone else as if our years together meant nothing. Feeling like I might get sick, I pushed off the wall and stumbled into the restroom. Inside, I leaned against the cool tile, my reflection in the mirror a stark reminder of the fool I had been. Tears threatened, but I willed them back. Crying wasn't going to help, I needed to think. After a few deep breaths, I splashed water on my face, trying to erase any sign of my tears. Composing myself, I stepped back into the hall, only to bump straight into Dad. Sheila, what's wrong? You look pale, Dad said, his voice full of concern as he noticed my disheveled appearance. It's nothing, Dad. Just feeling a bit under the weather, I lied, attempting to brush past him. Dad, however, wasn't having any of it. He took my arm gently and steered me away from the main hall into a quieter corridor. This isn't just a headache, is it? Talk to me, honey. The floodgates opened, and I poured out everything to him, from Ben's frequent late nights to what I had just witnessed. Dad listened, his face hardening with every word. This needs careful handling, Sheila. We'll sort it out, don't you worry, he assured me, his tone firm yet soothing. Let's meet at the detective's office tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this. Nodding, feeling a mix of relief and dread, I agreed. The rest of the evening was a blur. I couldn't bear to stay any longer at the party, claiming illness, and left with Jamie, who was confused but too sleepy to question much. Ben didn't come home that night, claiming later that he was caught up at work. I knew better now, but kept my newfound knowledge to myself, preparing for what was to come. The next steps needed to be planned with care, and I was grateful to have Dad by my side, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The next morning felt like one of those days when you wake up wishing the world would give you a redo. With a heavy heart and a mind racing with thoughts of betrayal, I drove to the detective's office where Dad had agreed to meet me. He was already there when I arrived, his face a mask of concern and determination. The detective, a middle-aged man named Ron, ushered us into his office. His room was lined with shelves filled with files and 2 chairs opposite his cluttered desk. It looked like a place where secrets came to light, and I braced myself for what was next. So, Mr. Morris told me a bit on the phone. You want to look into your husband's activities, correct? Ron's tone was professional, but there was a hint of sympathy in his eyes. Yes. I need to know if what I saw is just the tip of the iceberg, I said, my voice faltering a bit towards the end. Ron nodded, pulling out a notepad. I'll need some details from you. Times, places, any particular people involved besides the woman you mentioned. As I recounted everything, from Ben's late nights to the incident at the party, Ron took notes, his expression unreadable. After I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping the pen against his notepad. We'll start with surveillance, check his known hangouts, and track his movements. If he's meeting this woman, we'll find out when and where. Do you want photos or just a report? Photos. Dad cut in before I could answer. We need everything documented, just in case. Understood, Ron replied. He then looked at me. It might take a few weeks to gather everything. These things, they take time and patience. 3 agonizing weeks later, we were back in Ron's office, sitting across from him as he laid out what he had found. The folder he opened seemed to spill out my worst fears. Photos, detailed reports, bank statements, and more painted a picture I couldn't deny. Mrs. Morris, I'm sorry, but it's as you suspected, Ron began. Your husband has been seeing the assistant editor for over 2 years. Since shortly after she was hired by your father. My heart sank as he continued. He's transferred large sums to her accounts. Bought her an apartment and a car. They spend most of their free time together. And from what I've gathered, they've discussed marriage, planning it for after your son turns 18, to avoid any complications with alimony. Dad's face was stone. He reached over and squeezed my hand, his grip tight with shared outrage. This is unbelievable. After everything I've done for him, this is how he repays our family? Dad's voice was low, each word heavy with betrayal. I sat, frozen, as the reality settled in. The man I had loved and trusted had planned his future on the ruins of our past. What do we do now, Dad? My voice was barely a whisper, drowned out by the roaring in my ears. We'll figure this out, Sheila. We'll make sure he regrets this, Dad said firmly, his jaw set. Dad had invited Ben, me, and Lisa, the assistant editor, to our family home under the guise of discussing a new book. Once we were all seated in the living room, which had always been a place of warmth and laughter, Dad started the meeting in a tone that was unnervingly calm. Thank you all for coming. Today, I thought we'd discuss a potential new plot. Something real, something revealing. Ben looked uneasy, glancing at Lisa, who was visibly nervous. I sat silently, watching as Dad opened a folder thick with photos and documents, the evidence collected by the detective. He slowly pulled out one photo after another, laying them on the coffee table for all to see. Imagine a book where the main character, a successful writer, betrays everyone who loves him, Dad began, his voice steady but cold. Ben's face drained of color as each photo and document showcased his affair, his financial betrayals. Dad didn't stop there. He recounted how Ben got his start with his help, how I had supported him through thick and thin, writing the early books that made him famous, providing ideas and editing drafts. You see, I've invested a lot in you, Ben. And this, he waved at the photos, is how you've repaid us. Lisa began to cry softly, her hands trembling. I didn't think it would go this far, she murmured. I'm so sorry. I'm pregnant. Dad's eyes then turned to her. And you, young lady, think about the decisions you make and who they hurt. The room was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the decorous surroundings. Then, Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped together. I could make a few calls right now, to some very influential friends in the publishing world. What do you think would happen to your career then, Ben? Ben was shaking, his voice barely audible. Please, I made a mistake. That's not enough, Ben, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I slid the divorce papers across the table. Sign these. They state that all assets stay with me, as do the rights to our books. Lisa gasped, clutching her stomach. Please, don't leave me with nothing. I looked at her, my heart hardening against the betrayal, but softening at her plight. I'll leave you the apartment Ben bought you. That's more than generous, all things considered. She nodded quickly, wiping her tears, and signed the papers. Ben tried to argue, his eyes darting from the documents to Dad's stern face. This isn't fair. I deserve. Dad picked up his phone, holding it menacingly. Do I need to make those calls, Ben? Defeated, Ben signed the papers, his hands trembling as he realized the full extent of his losses. Once the door closed behind them, the silence was almost deafening. Dad turned to me, his expression softening. Sheila, let's focus on a fresh start now. You and Jamie need something better, something new. Maybe think about moving closer to us, getting a new place where you can make new memories. I nodded, feeling the weight of the day settling on my shoulders. I'll think about it, Dad. Thanks, I managed to say, the prospect of moving forward both daunting and necessary. When I got home, Jamie was waiting, his face anxious as he looked up from his homework. Mom, are you okay? How did it go? Sitting down beside him, I took a deep breath. It's over, Jamie. Your dad and we're done. He made some choices, and I made some too. We're going to start over, just you and me. Jamie reached out, taking my hand, his support immediate and firm. I'm with you, Mom. It's been rough, but I know you did the right thing. Let's just move on, together. Over the next few weeks, we talked a lot about our next steps. Dad's suggestion to move closer kept playing in my mind. The idea of a fresh start grew on me, and soon, Jamie and I began looking for a new place, somewhere closer to my parents, somewhere we could build a new life. Finding the right house took time, but when we did, it felt right, a cozy place not too far from my parents, but still our own. As we settled in, I returned to teaching. Walking back into the school, seeing the children's faces light up, hearing their laughter and excitement, reminded me why I loved my job so much. These kids, with their endless curiosity and resilience, helped me find my own strength again. Life started to find a rhythm again, a new normal that was different but fulfilling. Jamie thrived, diving into his studies and eventually heading off to university. His resolve and support never wavered, anchoring me through the changes. One evening, as I sat on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset, Dad came over, sitting beside me. "You've done well, Sheila. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Dad. It hasn't been easy, but it feels right. Starting over, being here, close to you and Mom, it's given us both a chance to heal and grow." He nodded, looking out over the yard. Life throws some tough lessons our way, but how we come out of them, that's what defines us. As we sat there, the tranquility of the evening wrapping around us, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. Yes, the road had been unimaginably hard, but here we were, stronger and together. The love of my family and the joy of my work with the children filled my days. I had found my way back to happiness, back to a life where I could thrive. My name's Julie. I was the first kid Mom had, back when she was still figuring out her life. She married young, straight out of high school, to my dad, Thomas. They were all about love and less about money, which didn't seem to work for her long. I was still toddling around when she met Richard, a guy with a wallet as thick as a brick and a fancy car to boot. She left Dad, took me, and never looked back, except to collect the alimony checks. Richard seemed alright at first, always bringing me little treats and letting me play in his big office filled with shiny things. But Mom, she was different around him. She always had this look on her face when she saw me, like I was a reminder of a life she wanted to forget. One evening, I remember hearing them talk in the kitchen while I was supposed to be watching TV. "She's too much like Tom," Mom said, her voice sharp. "Always asking questions, always looking at me like he used to." I didn't understand then, but it stung, hearing her talk like I was a problem. I loved my real dad, sure. He lived in a small apartment across the city, but every moment with him was a blast, even if we were just kicking a ball around in the park or eating cheap pizza. Mom's words that night stayed with me, and the way she'd say things only got sharper. "Can't you do anything right?" was a favorite of hers whenever I tried to help around the house or did my schoolwork in the living room. My dad, though, he was different. "You're doing great, Julie," he'd tell me every time I showed him my grades or a drawing from school. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Life at Mom and Richard's got more strained when I started school. Mom was always on about appearances, how I needed to wear the right clothes, hang out with the right kids. "Why can't you dress like Clara's daughter? Look at her," Mom would nag, holding up one of my classmates' pictures from a party I wasn't invited to. One day, after a particularly rough scolding about my muddy shoes in the hall, I snapped back. "At least Dad doesn't yell about a bit of dirt." The slap came quick, her hand stinging my cheek, before I even saw it move. "Don't you talk about your father like that," she hissed, her face close to mine, her breath smelling of coffee and anger. Tears welled up, but I bit them back, tough like Dad taught me. That night, lying in my bed, I promised myself I wouldn't let her see me cry, wouldn't give her the satisfaction. When Mom announced she was pregnant again, the house took on a weird vibe, like everything was suddenly about to change, but not necessarily for the better. She had this glow people talk about, but it never seemed to shine my way. "I'm having a baby with the man I love, Richard. It's going to be perfect," Mom cooed one evening, rubbing her belly as Richard beamed like he'd won some kind of prize. Richard, ever the charmer, chimed in. We'll need to redo the guest room. Make it fit for a little princess. My heart sank a bit. That was my room they were talking about, my little corner in their world. What about my room? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom shot me a look, her smile tightening. You can move into the smaller room, Julie. It's only fair. The baby will need the space. Fair. The way she said it made it sound like a done deal, no room for arguing. So, I moved. Packed up my stuff and relocated to the smallest room in the house, barely bigger than a closet. The months flew by, and soon Lily was born. She was all anyone could talk about. Isn't she just the most beautiful baby you've ever seen? Mom would gush to her friends over the phone, cradling Lily like she was made of the most precious porcelain. Yeah, she's cute, I'd mutter, trying to make myself part of the conversation. Cute was an understatement. Lily was adorable, and I couldn't help but love her at first sight. I wanted to be a good big sister, wanted to be involved and help out. One afternoon, I tried to sneak into Lily's room while Mom was busy in the kitchen. I tiptoed in, peering over the crib at my baby sister, who was gurgling happily. Hey there, Lily, I whispered, reaching a finger to let her grab. Mom must have heard me because she was suddenly there at the door, her voice sharp as a knife. What are you doing, Julie? I told you, you need to ask before you go into her room. I just wanted to see her, I protested, feeling the familiar sting of tears pricking my eyes. I wanted to help. Dad was different. During one of my weekends with him, I opened up while we were having pizza at our favorite spot. Mom's always on edge with me around Lily. It's like she thinks I'll break her or something. Dad chewed thoughtfully, then said, You know, Julie, some folks just have a hard time sharing love. It's like they think there's only so much to go around. But listen, you got a whole lot of heart. Don't let your mom's ways make you think otherwise. His words helped a bit, but back at Mom's, the distance between us grew. Even when I tried to share stories about school or friends, Mom's attention was always split, always half listening, half watching Lily. One day, I came home with a school award, second place in the science fair. I was buzzing, clutching the certificate like it was a ticket to their approval. Look, Mom, I won this, I exclaimed, holding it out to her as she fed Lily. That's nice, dear, she said without looking up. Put it on the fridge or something. Or something, I echoed to myself, the words hollow. I stuck the certificate on the fridge, a bit crooked, and stood back. It was just another piece of paper to them, just another day in the shadow of Lily. Things were pretty rocky at home by the time I hit high school. Between Mom's cold shoulders and Richard's indifference, I felt more like a guest than a family member. It was around then that the bomb dropped. Mom decided it was time for me to go live with Dad permanently. The day she told me, we were having dinner. It was one of those rare moments where it was just her and me at the table. Richard was late from work, and Lily was already tucked in. Julie, we need to talk about your future, Mom started, pushing her food around her plate with a fork. There was no warmth in her voice, just a cold, businesslike tone that immediately put me on edge. What about it? I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart was racing. We've been discussing things, and we think it's best if you move in with your father. With the new baby coming, things here are, well, they're complicated. I almost choked on my water. Move in with Dad? But why? I thought everything was fine here. Mom sighed, a sound that seemed to carry all her impatience. Look, Julie, you're not a child anymore. You need a space of your own, and we can't provide that here, not with the new situation. It's cramped, and frankly, the financial burden is more than we expected. It's better for everyone this way. I pushed my plate away, no longer hungry. And what about school? My friends? You can go to a new school. Make new friends, she said, as if it were that simple, as if I could just erase my life and start over with no problem. The next few weeks were a blur. I packed up my things, my world shrinking into boxes, books, clothes, the few keepsakes that meant something to me. Richard barely said goodbye, and Lily, too young to understand, gave me a confused hug. Moving day was tough. Dad lived on the other side of town in a modest apartment. It was clean but cluttered with memories of a life paused since Mom left him. He was standing there, waiting for me with open arms and a worried smile when I arrived. The apartment was nothing like the house I'd grown up in. My new room was half the size of my old one, with walls that needed paint and a window that looked out at a brick wall. But it was quiet, and Dad was trying. The first day at the new school was brutal. As I walked down the crowded hallways, I could feel the stares, hear the whispers. "That's the new girl," they'd say, as if I were some kind of oddity. In class, I kept to myself, doodling in my notebook, trying to block out the murmurs. When the bell rang, I was the first out the door, not wanting to linger. At home, Dad noticed my mood. "How was school?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "It was fine," I lied, shrugging off my coat and dumping my bag by the door. "If it gets tough, you tell me, okay? We're in this together. You're not alone, Julie." His words meant a lot, but the loneliness I felt was deep, gnawing. It wasn't just about missing my old friends or the big house. It was about feeling unwanted, pushed out, because I was too much of a burden. Adjusting to life at Dad's wasn't easy, but I figured out pretty quick that if I didn't pull myself together, things would just get worse. I woke up one morning, looked around my cramped room, and decided it was time to take charge of my life. "No one else is gonna do it for me," I muttered under my breath. Dad noticed the change in me almost immediately. Over breakfast one day, he looked up from his coffee and said, "You're looking more determined these days, Julie. What's on your mind?" I stirred my cereal around, thinking about how to word it. "I want to make something of myself, Dad. I don't want to end up stuck, you know?" He nodded, a serious look crossing his face. "I hear you, kiddo. So, what's the plan?" "That scholarship, the big one for the top students. I'm gonna get it," I declared, more to convince myself than him. Dad's smile was all the encouragement I needed. "If anyone can get it, it's you. Just tell me what you need from me." School was tough, with long hours spent catching up and even longer evenings buried in books. My teachers noticed the shift, even the tough ones seemed to respect the grind. Ms. Jensen, my math teacher, kept me after class one day. "Julie, your work has improved dramatically. What's the sudden interest?" "I need that scholarship," I replied bluntly, packing up my stuff. "I've got plans, and they don't include being stuck here forever." Ms. Jensen studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, keep at it. And let me know if you need extra help. I'm here." Making friends wasn't easy, but I managed to find a few people who didn't seem to mind that I wasn't all fun and games. During lunch, I'd sit with Maria and Luke, two kids who weren't exactly at the top of the social ladder, but knew how to laugh. "So, Julie, you're like a library ninja now, huh?" Luke joked one day, nudging me as we sat down with our trays. I cracked a smile. "Yeah, gotta be stealthy if I want to snag the best study spots." Maria chimed in, her voice soft but sincere. "It's cool what you're doing, Julie. Most wouldn't bother." The days rolled into months, and the pressure mounted as application deadlines drew near. Dad was my rock, always there with a hot meal and a listening ear whenever the stress got too much. The day I got the scholarship letter, my hands were shaking as I tore it open. Dad was right there, holding his breath. I scanned the words, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I whooped so loud I swear the neighbors heard. "I got it, Dad. I got it." I jumped up, the letter flapping in my hand like a flag of victory. Dad swept me up in a big hug, laughing and cheering right along with me. "I knew it. I knew you could do it." As I packed up my things for college a few months later, I felt ready. The future was bright, and for the first time, it felt like it was truly mine. I was leaving, but I was taking all these lessons, all this love and hard-earned wisdom with me. After graduating with honors and establishing a solid career, I felt like I was finally on stable ground. I was 28, doing well professionally, and had just started seeing a wonderful guy from work, Jack, who had been nothing but supportive. Then, out of nowhere, my mom called. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out, but suddenly here she was, back with a request, or more like a demand. Julie, your sister Lily is going to college in your city. We've paid her tuition, and we think it'd be best if she stayed with you, Mom said, her tone making it clear this wasn't just a suggestion. I hesitated, memories of our strained relationship flashing through my mind. But I wanted to believe things could be different. Okay, Mom, I'll help Lily out. It might be nice to reconnect, I responded, trying to keep any skepticism out of my voice. Lily moved in a week later, and right off the bat, it was clear we were worlds apart. She was as stunning as ever, obsessed with her appearance and the kind of lifestyle that screamed high maintenance. She brought with her a suitcase full of expectations and a personality that demanded they be met. Can you make sure we have almond milk and kale? I'm on a special diet, Lily mentioned casually on her first evening, examining her reflection in the mirror. Sure, I'll add them to the grocery list, I replied, trying to accommodate her. But living with Lily was more challenging than I'd anticipated. She partied like there was no tomorrow, often stumbling in at dawn, her carefree laughter echoing through the apartment while I lay awake, anxious about meetings and presentations. One afternoon, Jack came over as Lily was prepping for another night out. I noticed how she smiled at him, a little too sweetly, a little too long. Jack waited until she left to speak up. Julie, I think Lily's got the wrong idea about me. She's been, well, flirty. I felt a mix of anger and embarrassment. Thanks for telling me, Jack. I'll talk to her. When I confronted Lily, her response was a dismissive laugh. Oh, come on, Julie. I'm just being friendly. Besides, can I help it if he likes me back? That's my fiancé, Lily. You need to respect that. I shot back, my voice firm. Her laugh chilled me. Julie, I'm used to getting what I want. Always have been. That was the last straw. I couldn't live like this, feeling like I had to guard my life from my own sister. You need to find another place to live, Lily. This isn't working out, I told her, my decision final. Lily stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Within an hour, my phone rang. It was Mom, her voice cold and sharp. You're such an envious girl, Julie. Can't stand to see your sister happy, can you? I just want respect, Mom. That's all, I replied, but I might as well have been talking to a wall. After that, things went quiet with Lily. I heard through the grapevine she dropped out of college and was floating through her social circles on charm and whims. As for me, I refocused on my life with Jack, my work, and the peace of rebuilding my boundaries. 2 years had flown by since I last tried to patch things up with my family. Things were going well for me, I was moving up at work, and life with Jack was better than ever. That's when I heard the news about Lily. She had dropped out of college and was getting married to some rich guy she'd met. Feeling a mix of curiosity and goodwill, I picked up the phone to call home and offer my congratulations. It was my mom who answered, her voice cold and distant as always. Mom, I heard about Lily's wedding. I just wanted to say congratulations. I started, trying to keep my tone light. Well, don't bother. We're not waiting for you at the wedding. It's for rich people only, and we don't need any beggars there. She spat out, her words cutting deep. I clenched the phone a little tighter, feeling the old sting of rejection. Really, Mom? That's how you're going to be? What did you expect, Julie? You've always been the difficult one. Just stay away, she said before hanging up. I stood there, phone in hand, the dial tone echoing in my ear. The hurt was palpable, but I wasn't going to let it ruin me. I found out later that they'd spared no expense on Lily's wedding, hiring popular artists and actors to make it a lavish affair. Time passed, and life didn't stand still for me either. Jack proposed, and suddenly I was planning my own wedding, nothing extravagant, but every bit filled with love and sincerity. I called Dad to share the news. He was overjoyed. "Julie, that's wonderful. You bet I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world," he said, his voice brimming with happiness. Encouraged by Dad's reaction, I made one last attempt to bridge the gap with my mom. I dialed her number, my heart racing as I waited for her to pick up. "Mom, I'm getting married. I want you to come," I said, holding my breath. Her reply was as chilly as a winter breeze. "No, Julie. I'm not interested in attending some modest gathering of losers. Count me out." I swallowed hard, fighting back the hurt. "All right, Mom. Take care," I said, and hung up, knowing it was probably the last time I'd invite her into my life. Our wedding day was simple but beautiful. Dad walked me down the aisle, his presence a steady comfort. The room was filled with genuine smiles and heartfelt congratulations, a stark contrast to the grandeur and coldness of Lily's wedding spectacle. Our modest reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and stories. Jack and I mingled with friends and family who loved us for who we were, not for the money or status we brought. Life was moving along sweetly. Jack and I were thrilled to be expecting our first child. It was during this time, one ordinary afternoon, that my phone rang, and the voice on the other end turned my day upside down. It was Mom, and she was not calling with congratulations. "Julie, you have to take us in. We're desperate," she blurted out without even a hello. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, although part of me didn't want to know. "It's all gone wrong. Richard's business tanked, we mortgaged the house for Lily's wedding, and now it's all just gone. And your sister's marriage is over. Her husband kicked her out, and he's demanding money for her cheating," she explained hurriedly, her voice edged with panic. I took a deep breath, trying to process the flood of information. "Okay, slow down. What exactly are you asking of me?" "We need a place to stay. All of us. We're coming to your house," she stated matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious solution. The request, or rather, the demand, hit me hard. "No, Mom. You can't just decide to move in with us. It doesn't work like that. Julie, you owe us. After everything we've done for you," she snapped, her voice sharp and commanding. That struck a nerve. "Oh, you? Mom, remember how you were when I needed you most? You pushed me out. You chose everything over me, and now you expect me to just open my doors?" Her voice rose. "You're being selfish, Julie. Where's your family spirit? I am your mother. And you've never let me forget it. But being a mother doesn't mean what you think it does. It's not about debts and demands," I shot back, my patience wearing thin. Her fury was palpable, even through the phone. "You'll regret this, Julie. I might even take you to court. Get what I deserve." I couldn't help but laugh, though it was more from disbelief than amusement. "Go ahead and try. Dad was my guardian when you kicked me out, remember? What are you going to claim? That your daughter wouldn't let you live off her after you threw her out?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear her brain ticking over. "This isn't over, Julie," she finally hissed before hanging up. Life after my last call with Mom felt like a fresh start, a true new beginning. Jack and I were busy getting the nursery ready, picking out paint colors, and assembling cribs, all while navigating the usual ups and downs of pregnancy. It was a Sunday morning, bright and early, and I was setting up some baby clothes we'd just bought, folding them neatly into the new dresser. Jack was drilling something in the corner, the electric screwdriver buzzing away. He stopped, wiped his forehead, and looked over at me with a smile. "How's it going over there, Julie? Need any help?" "I've got it, thanks. Just thinking about everything. It's really happening, huh?" I responded, running my hand over a tiny, soft onesie. "It really is. We're going to be parents, Julie." His voice was full of awe and a bit of nervous excitement. Just then, there was a knock at the door. I was surprised. Who could it be this early on a Sunday? Jack went to answer it while I continued organizing. I heard voices, and then Jack called out, "Julie, it's for you." Walking into the living room, I was surprised to see my dad standing there, a big grin on his face and a teddy bear in hand. "Surprise!" he exclaimed. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I couldn't hide my delight, rushing over to give him a big hug. "I wanted to come and see how my favorite daughter is doing. And I brought something for my future grandchild." He handed me the teddy bear, which was soft and cuddly. "Thank you, Dad. It means the world to me that you're here," I said, feeling a bit emotional. We sat down, and Dad looked around at the half-assembled baby furniture and the stacks of baby books. "Looks like you're almost ready for the little one." "We're trying. It's a lot, but we're excited," I told him, then paused, biting my lip. "Dad, I had another call with Mom. It didn't go well." Dad's expression sobered. "I heard about it from your mom. She wasn't too pleased, was she?" "No, she wasn't. But Dad," I stood my ground. "I had to. For me, for Jack, for the baby. We need peace here," I said firmly. The day passed with us sharing stories, Dad giving us some unsolicited but amusing parenting advice, and just enjoying being together. It was a good day, one of those days you know you'll look back on fondly. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack, Dad, and I sat on the porch, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. Jack put his arm around me, and I leaned into him. "You know, despite everything with Mom and all the drama, I feel lucky. We have each other, we're about to start this amazing new chapter, and I have a feeling it's going to be great," I said, looking out at the fading light. Jack kissed the top of my head. "It will be. We've got this, Julie." As night fell and Dad said his goodbyes, I felt a profound sense of contentment and readiness for what was to come. The challenges with my mom and the uncertainty of new beginnings had been tough, but they'd led me here, to this moment, surrounded by love and support. My name's Jess. I've always been the kind who gets things done on her own. By the time I was 33, I was deep into my career, not even thinking about settling down, despite the occasional admirer. But, as they say, life happens when you're busy making other plans. It was a regular Wednesday evening, and I was about to head home from work when my car decided it had other ideas. There I was, stranded in the office parking lot, hood up, hands on my hips, cursing under my breath at the smoking engine. That's when Tom walked over. I noticed him a few times around the lot. He worked in another part of the building. Tall, with a kind of quiet confidence about him, he had that look that said he could handle just about anything. "Car trouble?" he asked, an eyebrow raised as he approached. "You could say that," I replied, trying not to show my frustration. "It just started making this awful noise, and then smoke everywhere." Tom chuckled, which normally would tick me off, but there was something genuine about it that kept me calm. "Mind if I take a look?" "Be my guest." I gestured towards the open hood. "I'm Jess, by the way." "Tom," he said, extending a grease-free hand, surprisingly. "Let's see what's going on with this old beast." He poked around for a minute, then straightened up, wiping his hands. "It's your alternator, I'd bet my last dollar on it. You're not going anywhere tonight unless you get it towed." "Great, just my luck." "Fantastic," I sighed. "Thanks for the diagnosis." Tom laughed again, pulling out his phone. "I've got a buddy who owns a shop not too far from here. Let me call him and see if he can help us out." While he talked on the phone, I couldn't help but notice how easy it was to just stand there with him. It wasn't like me to feel comfortable with a stranger so quickly. "All right, he can tow your car tonight, and he'll look at it first thing tomorrow. I can give you a lift home if you need," Tom offered after he hung up. I hesitated for a moment. Mom always said not to get in cars with strangers, but then again, I wasn't exactly a kid anymore. "Sure, that'd be great. Thanks, Tom." "No problem. Just trying to be helpful," he said with a smile. "Besides, it's not every day I get to rescue a damsel in distress." "Whoa there, cowboy." I shot back playfully, I'm no damsel, and I'm not in distress. I just have a stubborn car. Noted. Tom grinned as we walked to his car. Stubborn car, tough owner. The drive was short but filled with easy conversation. We talked about work, our favorite places to eat around town, and some of the crazy experiences we had at our jobs. It was refreshing to talk to someone so normal. When he dropped me off at my apartment, he handed me a business card. In case you need a ride to the shop tomorrow, or if your car gives you more grief. I took the card, a small smile playing on my lips. Thanks, Tom. Maybe I'll call you, and not just for car troubles. He winked as he drove off, leaving me there with a weird feeling in my stomach. Excitement? Maybe. For the first time in a long while, I was actually looking forward to what tomorrow might bring. After Tom and I met, things moved pretty fast in a good way. He was open right from the start, which I respected a lot. But as we got closer, he started to share more about his family dynamics, and it wasn't the pretty picture I was used to growing up with. Tom's older brother, Mike, had always been the golden boy in the eyes of their parents, especially their mom, Linda. According to Tom, Linda doted on Mike, always talking him up as the smartest and most successful. Mike got more attention, more praise, and yeah, more of everything else too. Tom seemed to have made his peace with being the second fiddle, but for someone like me, who came from a family where love and fairness were a big deal, it was hard to swallow. I remember telling Tom, "It's not right, you know. You're just as great as anyone, Mike included." Tom just shrugged, a little uncomfortable. "That's just how it is, Jess. I've dealt with it. Let's not make waves, okay?" The first time I met Linda, it was clear she wasn't thrilled about me. It wasn't anything she said outright, it was more the way she talked about Mike in front of us, barely acknowledging Tom's achievements. "Mike just got promoted again. Can you believe it? We're so proud," she'd gush, while Tom just nodded along. Despite all that, I still tried to make a connection, but it felt like hitting a brick wall. Eventually, I realized maybe Tom and I were better off without trying so hard to win them over. 2 years down the line, Tom and I decided to tie the knot. It wasn't a big affair, just something small, with a few close friends and family. Mike, surprisingly, was genuinely happy for us, which was more than I could say for Linda and her husband. They showed up, sure, but there wasn't much joy in their congratulations. At the reception, I caught Linda boasting to another relative about Mike's latest business venture, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I was mingling nearby with some of our friends when Tom caught my eye, a look of resignation on his face. I walked over to him, squeezing his hand. "Hey, let them talk about whatever. Today's about us, right?" I whispered. "Right," Tom nodded, giving me a small smile. "Thanks for putting up with all this, Jess." When Mike and his wife welcomed their first child, a boy, the entire family went all out. I mean, it was like a royal celebration. Linda threw a huge bash, balloons, cake, the works. Her social media was on fire with photos and posts about being the world's happiest grandma. The love and pride she poured into that event were obvious to anyone who saw it. A year later, Tom and I had our little Emily, and the contrast in Linda's reaction couldn't have been starker. There was no big party, no social media fanfare. Honestly, it stung more than I thought it would. When Linda called to congratulate us, her voice carried that formal tone reserved for acquaintances, not family. "Congratulations, Jess, Tom. A girl, that's nice," she'd said, her enthusiasm as flat as a pancake. "Thanks, Linda. We're really excited." I tried to keep my voice bright, but it was hard. "That's wonderful. Let me know when you have the baptism planned, I'll make sure to clear my schedule," she replied, and that was pretty much it. At Emily's baptism, the disparity became even more obvious. Linda came, of course, she's the grandma after all, but her whole demeanor was so offhand it might as well have been another Sunday service for her. While we were setting up the hall for the small gathering after the ceremony, I overheard Linda talking to one of her friends. "Oh, Mike's boy is just starting to walk. It's incredible how quickly he's picking it up. We think he'll be quite the athlete. Feeling a bit irked, I walked over to Tom, who was arranging chairs and didn't seem to notice his mother's gushing about his nephew. Tom, doesn't it bother you? The way your mom is all over your nephew and just here for Emily? Tom looked up, a slight frown creasing his brow. Yeah, it does. But what can we do, Jess? It's how she is. Mike's always been the star. But Emily's your star, our star. Doesn't she deserve the same? I pushed back, not ready to drop it. Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. Of course, she does. And she'll always have us. I know it's not the same, but nothing. I cut in, my frustration peaking. She should care more, Tom. It's not fair to Emily. You think I don't know that? But confronting my mom, it's just going to make things worse. She won't change, he said, almost pleadingly. As the day went on, I tried to shake off the feeling of disappointment. I focused on our friends and the part of the family that was thrilled for us. Emily was a bundle of joy, oblivious to the adult tension swirling around her. Post-baptism, we had a little party back at our place. Linda stayed a bit, mostly keeping to herself or chatting with Tom's dad, who seemed to be trying to make up for his wife's lack of enthusiasm by being extra cheerful. As Linda was leaving, I decided to try one more time. Linda, we missed seeing you with Emily today. She's getting so big already, isn't she? Linda paused, her keys in hand, and actually looked at me for a moment. Yes, she is. Time flies. Well, take care of her. And let me know if you need anything. Emily grew more curious and chatty as she hit her 3rd birthday. Kids, they notice more than you think, and it wasn't long before she started asking about her grandparents. Mommy, why doesn't Grandma Linda come to see me like she sees Cousin Jack? Emily's little voice was full of innocent confusion one evening while we were looking at family photos online. I paused, not sure how to explain family politics to a 3-year-old. Well, sweetie, Grandma Linda is very busy, and she lives a bit far away. But we see her on special days, right? It was a weak excuse, and even Emily seemed to sense it. But she sees Jack all the time. He has lots of pictures with her, Emily pointed out, her brow furrowing slightly. Tom, overhearing us from the dining room where he was fixing one of Emily's broken toys, came over and knelt beside her. Hey, Pumpkin, Grandma loves you a lot too. We all show our love in different ways, okay? Emily looked at him, then at me, and nodded, though it was clear she didn't fully buy it. Okay, Daddy. The conversation didn't sit well with me. That night, after Emily went to bed, I brought it up with Tom. We were in the kitchen, me sipping my tea while he cleaned up. Tom, this isn't right. Emily's noticing the difference. How long before it starts affecting her? I said, my voice low but firm. Tom put down the dish he was drying and leaned against the counter. I know, Jess. It sucks. But what do you suggest we do? Confront my mom? At least let her know how we feel. It's not just about visits. It's the way she's being treated compared to Jack. It could hurt her, growing up feeling less loved. I argued, feeling my frustration rise. Tom sighed heavily. I'll talk to her. I'm not expecting miracles, but maybe if she realizes it's affecting Emily. Thank you, I said, feeling a mix of relief and dread. A few days later, Tom and I decided to visit Linda without Emily. We arrived at her house, and after some initial small talk, Tom steered the conversation to what was on our minds. Mom, we need to talk about something important, Tom began, his tone more serious than usual. Linda looked between us, her expression cautious. What's wrong? Is it Emily? It's about Emily, and you, Tom continued. She's been asking why you don't visit her like you do Jack. It's starting to affect her. Linda stiffened, her face tightening. I see all my grandchildren when I can. You know how busy I am. But Mom, it's not just about time. It's about how differently you treat them. Emily feels it. We feel it. I added, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. Linda's eyes flashed. Are you accusing me of favoring my grandchildren? Not accusing, Mom. It's just what's happening. We're worried about Emily, Tom explained, his voice steady. Linda sighed, looking away for a moment before meeting our eyes again. I'll try to do better. But I don't like being told how to be a grandmother. We're not telling you how to be a grandmother. We just want Emily to feel as loved as Jack, I said, hoping she'd understand the difference. Linda nodded slowly, her posture relaxing slightly. I'll make more of an effort. That's all I can promise. That night, as I checked on Emily, asleep and peaceful in her bed, I felt a renewed sense of protectiveness. Whatever Linda's response would be, Tom and I were determined to make sure Emily grew up knowing she was loved and valued, no less than anyone else in the family. Emily's 7th birthday was coming up, and she was all excited about her party. The house was decorated with balloons and streamers, and Emily was buzzing around in her favorite princess costume. Guests started arriving, and the kids were having a blast. I kept an eye on the door, waiting for Linda and George. They finally showed up, about half an hour late. Linda had a small, somewhat dusty-looking gift bag in her hand. Emily ran up to them, excited. "Grandma, Grandpa," she squealed, hugging George tightly. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," George said, hugging her back. Linda handed Emily the gift bag with a tight smile. "Here you are, dear. Happy birthday," she said, her voice lacking warmth. Emily opened the gift right away. It was a small stuffed animal, clearly not new. "Oh, thank you, Grandma." Emily tried to hide her disappointment. I caught Tom's eye, and he frowned slightly. We both saw the letdown on Emily's face. I was about to say something when Carly, my friend, who'd overheard some guests talking, pulled me aside. "Jess, did you hear about Linda's gift to Jack last week? A whole space-themed party with a professional telescope and all. And Emily gets that?" Carly nodded towards the stuffed animal. I clenched my fists, feeling my face heat up. "I can't believe this. Every time, Carly. It's like she does it on purpose." The party continued with lots of guests and relatives mingling and enjoying the day. Suddenly, I noticed Emily wasn't around. I found her crying in one of the rooms. "Sweetie, what happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "Mommy, Cousin Jack said I'm a second-class person and I need to wash up before I can play with him," she sobbed, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I felt a surge of anger. "He said what?" I stood up, stormed into the living room, and pulled Tom aside. "Tom, Jack is bullying Emily. He just told her she's second class." Tom's face turned red with anger. "What? I'll sort this out." He immediately went to find his brother, Mike. Mike was taken aback. "I don't understand, Tom. Jack's just a kid. Where'd he get that idea?" Nearby, Jack, unaware of the grown-up tensions, casually mentioned, "Grandma said not to play with Emily. She told me." Silence fell over the room. Everyone turned to look at Linda, who was visibly embarrassed. "This is unacceptable, Linda. You need to apologize," one of the guests said out loud. Others murmured in agreement. Linda, cornered and flustered, muttered a reluctant apology and, looking at Emily, added, "I'm sorry, dear. How about we spend some time next week, just you and me?" Despite my doubts, I agreed. Maybe this was a chance for Linda to right her wrongs. I nodded, hoping for the best. "Okay, Linda. Let's try that." After the birthday party fiasco, things were tense at home. Tom and I knew we couldn't let it slide. It was more than just about a gift, it was about how Linda's attitude was affecting our daughter. We needed to have a real, no-holds-barred conversation with her. The following week, we decided to meet with Linda at her house. On the drive over, Tom seemed nervous, gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. "You okay?" I asked, touching his arm gently. "Yeah, just not looking forward to this talk. But it's got to be done, for Emily," he replied, his voice steady but strained. We arrived and found Linda in her garden, pruning some bushes. She looked up, wiping sweat from her brow with a dirty glove. Tom, Jess, what brings you here? Something wrong? Linda's voice was cautious, a hint of defensiveness already lacing her tone. We need to talk, Mom. About what happened at Emily's party, Tom said, getting straight to the point. Linda sighed, setting down her gardening shears. I thought this might be coming. Let's go inside. Once in the living room, I decided to kick things off. Linda, what Jack said at the party, and your behavior, it's hurting Emily. She feels less loved, and that's not okay. Linda crossed her arms, her back straightening. I already apologized for that. Jack's words were unfortunate, but kids say things without meaning them. It's more than just Jack, Linda. It's about how you treat her differently from her cousin. It sends a message, not just to the kids but to everyone. I pressed, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. Linda looked away, then back at us. I do the best I can. I've always favored boys, it's just how I was raised. But I love all my grandchildren. But your actions don't show that, Linda. Actions speak louder than words, Tom interjected, his tone more forceful than I'd heard in a long time. There was a pause, heavy with tension, before Linda finally spoke, her voice softer, almost vulnerable. Maybe I've been wrong. It's hard for me to admit, but perhaps I haven't been fair to Emily. Tom and I exchanged a quick glance, surprised by her admission. I don't know how to fix this overnight, but I'm willing to try. For Emily, Linda continued, her eyes meeting mine, then Tom's. We appreciate that, Linda. Maybe start by spending some quality time with Emily. Just the two of you, I suggested, hoping to bridge the gap. Linda nodded. I'd like that. I'll call and set something up. A day at the zoo, perhaps? She likes animals, doesn't she? She does, I smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Linda had promised to spend the whole day with Emily, just the two of them, which I thought was a great step towards mending their relationship. So, you can imagine my surprise when I saw her grandson, Jack, climbing into the car with them. Linda, I thought today was about you and Emily spending time together, I said, a bit confused as we stood by her car. I know, Jess, but I thought it would be good for them to have some time together too, to reconcile and fix things from the birthday party, Linda replied, sounding like she had the best intentions. Although hesitant, I didn't want to argue in front of the kids. All right, just make sure Emily has a good time too, I said, and gave Emily a little hug and a kiss. You've got your phone, sweetie. Call me if you need anything, okay? I will, Mommy, Emily said, a bit uncertain but trying to be brave as she climbed into the car. I watched them drive off, feeling a mix of emotions but hoping for the best. Several hours later, my phone rang. It was Emily, and she was crying. Mommy, I'm so cold and I'm scared. She sobbed into the phone, her voice quivering. Baby, where are you? Why are you cold? It's warm outside, I said, my heart starting to race with worry. I'm at the ice rink, Mommy. Grandma went somewhere with Jack. I don't know where they are, she cried, and my worry turned into anger. The ice rink? Emily, why are you at an ice rink? Did Grandma not tell you where she was going? She said we were going for a walk, and then we came here. I didn't bring my jacket, Mommy. It's so cold, she continued, her voice shaking. Okay, sweetheart, find someone who works there, maybe at the desk or a coach, and give them the phone, I instructed, trying to keep my voice calm for her sake. A few minutes later, a man came on the line. Hello, I'm the skating instructor here. Your daughter was left unsupervised. We're keeping her safe and warm here with us. Thank you. I'm on my way, I'll be there as fast as I can, I replied, my voice firm but my mind reeling with frustration and anger. As I drove to the rink, my thoughts were a whirlwind. Why would Linda think it was okay to leave Emily at an ice rink alone? And where had she gone with Jack that was so important? When I reached the skating rink, Emily was safe, thankfully, but the scene was a mess. The rink staff had already called the police and the custody service due to the nature of the situation. My heart was pounding as I explained everything to the officers, detailing how Linda had irresponsibly left Emily alone and in an inappropriate environment. The grandma brought them here, skated for a bit, and then just took off with the boy when he fell, the skating instructor told the police, shaking his head. The little girl was shivering in her t-shirt and shorts. I was furious, listening to him. She's just a child, how could someone think she'd be okay alone in such a place? I said, my voice cracking with emotion as I gave my statement. The police took everything seriously. They confirmed with the mall security that Linda had been there with the kids for about an hour before rushing off, leaving Emily behind. The more they learned, the angrier I felt. I called Linda right there, needing answers. Linda, what were you thinking? Emily could have been seriously hurt. Jack was hurt, he needed me. Emily was fine when I left, Linda responded, her tone dismissive as if it was a minor oversight. Fine? You left her alone, Linda. She was freezing and terrified. I snapped back, hardly believing her lack of concern. After hanging up with Linda, I called Tom to tell him everything. He was livid, beyond upset. This is unforgivable, Jess. I'm going to make sure this gets handled properly, he said, his voice firm and resolute. The fallout was immediate and severe. The police conducted a thorough investigation, and Linda was fined heavily. Due to the circumstances, she was also barred from any unsupervised visits with Emily. When Tom's brother, Mike, heard about what had happened, he and his wife were appalled and pulled back from Linda, condemning her actions outright. Tom's dad, George, also got involved, upset about the entire situation. I'm sorry, Tom. I should have stepped in sooner. I followed her lead for too long, he confessed one evening over the phone. He even mentioned that this strain had pushed him to consider a divorce, unable to align with Linda's actions and attitudes any longer. It seemed the whole family dynamic was unraveling because of this incident. Through all this, my resolve only strengthened. Watching how everything unfolded made it clear to me that as a parent, my first and most important job was to protect Emily. I promised myself and her that I'd always be her advocate and shield, no matter what. Hey, my name's Naomi. Let me walk you through my little world, just so you know who you're dealing with here. I grew up with just my mom, Sarah. She was a nurse, always running off her feet to make ends meet, but somehow, she managed. We never had much, but she busted her ass to make sure I never felt it. Every evening, when she'd slump down at our kitchen table, I'd hear bits and pieces about her day, how she helped an old man walk again or comforted someone who had nobody else. It got me thinking, early on, that I wanted to be in the helping business too, just with less blood, so biology was it for me. As for my dad? Never knew him. He was out of the picture before I could even crawl, and Mom never talked much about him, except to say it was just us, and that was enough. And honestly, it was. School was my thing, especially science. I ate up anything to do with cells and genes, anything that explained a little bit of why we're here and how we tick. Made sense to me to go in that direction career-wise, so I ended up at a pharmaceutical company after college, messing around with compounds and hopefully making something useful. It wasn't all work, though. I had my share of fun, too. My best friend, Jess, made sure of that. She dragged me out to all the parties she could, saying I needed to lighten up. That's where I met Alex. Come on, Naomi, you're gonna love this guy. Jess nudged me one night at one of her famous backyard bashes. She had this grin on her face, the kind that told me she was up to no good. Jess, I'm not. Just talk to him. His name's Alex. Cute, funny, and as nerdy about music as you are about your science stuff. She pushed, practically shoving a drink into my hand. I remember rolling my eyes, but let's be real, I was curious. So, I let her lead me through the crowd, past the makeshift dance floor where a couple of guys were trying way too hard, to where Alex was standing, awkwardly holding a beer and looking like he wanted to be anywhere but at a party. "Hey, Alex, this is Naomi." Jess introduced us with a little too much enthusiasm. "Naomi, meet Alex, the only other person I can tolerate for more than an hour." We talked about everything that night, from the latest rock albums to the weirdest science facts. Turned out, he was into biology too, but more the corporate side of things. His dad ran a toilet paper company, which cracked me up. "A toilet paper tycoon, huh?" I teased. "Hey, everybody needs it," Alex shot back, laughing. "What about you? Saving the world one petri dish at a time?" "Something like that," I grinned. We clicked, simple as that. A year flew by with Alex. Movies, late-night talks, dinners with Jess, poking fun at us for being disgustingly cute. Everything was pretty perfect, till he wanted me to meet his folks. I was game but nervous as hell about it. His dad was this big-shot business owner, and his mom stayed at home, keeping their life in order. We met at some swanky restaurant downtown that had more forks at each setting than I had drawers in my kitchen. Alex held my hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze as we waited for his parents to show up. "They're usually right on time," Alex muttered, checking his watch for the umpteenth time. Just as he said it, a man with a commanding air and a woman with a carefully styled bob walked in. George and Linda, the people who could potentially be my future in-laws. "Mom, Dad, this is Naomi." Alex introduced me with a proud smile. Linda offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she took me in, from my hair down to my shoes. George, however, gave a warm handshake, his grin genuine. "Nice to meet you, Naomi. Alex has told us a lot about you," George said, settling down beside his wife. The dinner started off well enough. We talked about mundane things, weather, the restaurant's decor, and a bit about George's toilet paper empire, which he discussed with a sort of bemused pride. Then Linda, swirling her wine glass, leaned in with a smile that felt more like a shark sizing up its next meal. "So, Naomi, Alex tells us you're a biologist. That must be interesting." "Yeah, it's pretty fascinating work. Getting to see the building blocks of life, helping develop new medicines," I replied, trying to sound both enthusiastic and humble. "And your parents must be proud." "What does your father do?" Linda asked, the question dropped like a casual afterthought. The table seemed to go a bit quieter. Alex's grip on my hand tightened. I hesitated, the weight of her question sinking in. "I wouldn't know, actually. My dad left before I was born. It's just been me and my mom," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the churn in my gut. Linda's eyebrows shot up, her smile faltering. "Oh, I see. That's rather unfortunate. It's hard to know what you're getting with uncertain lineage. Not knowing if there's a history of, well, undesirable traits." My mouth felt dry. I glanced at Alex, whose jaw had tightened. "I think people are more than their genetics," I managed to say. "Of course, but you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree," Linda continued, her tone light but her words heavy. "For all we know, he could have been a drunk or worse. And being raised by a single mother, well, it's not the ideal situation for stability, is it?" George seemed uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as he tried to change the subject. "Linda, why don't we?" "No, George, these are legitimate concerns. We're thinking about the future of our family here." Linda cut in, her gaze fixed on me like I was a problem to solve. Alex finally spoke up, his voice firm. "Mom, Naomi is amazing. She's smart, kind, and the hardest worker I know. Whatever her dad was or wasn't doesn't change who she is." The rest of the meal passed in a blur of tension. I pushed food around my plate, feeling like I'd been put on trial and found wanting. When we finally left the restaurant, the relief was palpable. A whole year of mostly bliss and a little bit of family drama flew by, and there we were, sitting at my mom's cozy kitchen table, talking wedding plans. Mom was all smiles and tears, thrilled to bits about the big day. "Naomi, this is going to be beautiful. I'm so proud of you," she kept saying, squeezing my hand. Just as we were picking colors and themes, Alex's phone buzzed. His face fell as soon as he saw who it was. "It's my mom," he said, excusing himself to take the call in the next room. The change in his tone had my stomach tightening with nerves. I exchanged a worried look with Mom, who mouthed, "Everything okay?" Moments later, Alex came back, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "My dad had an accident. He's in the hospital. We need to go, now." He rushed out the words. We grabbed our things and sped to the hospital. The drive felt like the longest of my life, each second stretching out as I imagined the worst. When we arrived, Linda was pacing the waiting area, a mess of worry. "He just lost consciousness while driving. Thank God someone saw and called it in," she said, her voice cracking. "He was supposed to be at a meeting. Now they're saying it's his lungs, they found a serious disease." My heart sank. "What do they say needs to be done?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady for Alex's sake. "He needs a part of a lung, a transplant." Linda choked out the words. "They want to check if Alex could be a donor." Without hesitation, Alex spoke up. "Let's do whatever tests are needed. I'm here, I'm ready." They took him away to run the preliminary tests, and Linda and I sat in an uneasy silence. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Finally, Alex returned, holding a sheet of paper in his hand, his brow furrowed. "They've done the blood tests and stuff. Look, Naomi, this is odd," he said, handing me the results. I glanced at the paper and my eyes widened. "Blood type AB." I remembered the conversation about blood types we had once, idly chatting. "Alex, didn't you tell me both your parents are type A?" "Yeah, they are. Why?" He looked puzzled. "If both your parents are type A, you can't be AB," I explained slowly, the scientist in me kicking in despite the personal chaos. "It's just not genetically possible." Alex's face went pale. "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath, not wanting to unravel this here. "Let's just keep this info for now," I said, taking out my phone and snapping a photo of the results. "Might need to think this through later." He nodded, confusion written all over him, but we were quickly pulled back into the current crisis as a doctor approached us. "Your fiancé isn't a match, unfortunately. But we're arranging for another potential donor now. The surgery is urgent," the doctor explained briskly. We spent the next hours waiting, caught in a haze of medical updates and silent personal questions. Despite everything, my mind kept circling back to the blood type issue, but I pushed it away, focusing on being there for Alex and hoping for his dad's recovery. After the successful surgery and Alex's dad's swift recovery, we didn't want to put our lives on hold any longer. So, we decided to go ahead with our engagement party. It was supposed to be a celebration, a new beginning, but as it turned out, not everyone was on the same page. We picked this lovely restaurant overlooking the river, thinking it'd be perfect for a night of joy. I was buzzing around, making sure everything was just right, but my nerves were shot. My mom was running late because of a last-minute emergency at her clinic, which I knew was going to kick off some snide remarks. Sure enough, as the guests started filling in, Linda took her chance the moment she arrived. Dressed to the nines, she swept in with a frosty air that could chill champagne. "Starting without the mother of the bride, are we?" Linda said loudly, making sure her voice carried over to where I was checking on the seating arrangement. "Well, I suppose punctuality isn't valued in some families." "Naomi, dear, it's such a shame your mother's habits reflect so poorly on you." I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile. "She got caught up at work, Linda. You know, saving lives." "She'll be here any minute," I replied, keeping my tone light despite the heat rising in my cheeks. Linda tooted, shaking her head as she glanced around, pulling some of our relatives closer. "It's always something, isn't it? An engagement dinner is a significant event, yet it seems some people don't treat it with the respect it deserves." It's just such behavior that makes one question the upbringing, doesn't it? I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this night wasn't about Linda or her approval. Everyone who knows us understands and respects why she might be late. It's really not a problem for anyone here, I countered, my voice steady but firm. Oh, but it is, Naomi. When you marry into a family, you bring your background with you. And let's be honest, dear, your background is a bit muddled, isn't it? Linda continued, her voice dripping with disdain. A daughter born out of wedlock, to a woman who couldn't even manage to catch a husband. The murmurs around us grew, and I saw Alex's face darken from across the room. He started to make his way over, but I raised my hand slightly, signaling him to let me handle it. Linda, my mother has done a remarkable job raising me on her own. She's shown me the value of hard work and integrity, something we all appreciate here, I said, my voice louder now, making sure it carried the weight of my conviction. And Alex and I are committed to each other, regardless of what anyone else thinks or says. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but I didn't want the evening to spiral into conflict. I took a deep breath, glancing around at the gathered friends and family who were here to celebrate with us. Let's not let this delay us any further, I suggested, my voice calm but carrying. Please, everyone, let's sit down and enjoy the evening. We're here to celebrate our engagement, something happy and full of hope. The engagement dinner was in full swing, despite the rocky start. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing and chatting over plates of delicious food. I was making my rounds, ensuring all our guests felt welcomed, when the front door of the restaurant swung open. My heart leapt. It was Mom, finally here, looking a bit flustered but as beautiful as ever in her elegant dress. Sorry I'm so late, everyone, she called out, making her way through the crowd to where we were gathered around a table with Alex's parents. I figured it was as good a time as any to formally introduce her to Alex's folks. Mom, this is George and Linda, Alex's parents, I said, gesturing towards them with a smile. But as soon as my mom laid eyes on George, her whole demeanor changed. She let out a sharp gasp, covered her eyes with her hands, and staggered back a step. It was like she'd seen a ghost. Mom? What's wrong? I rushed to her side, completely bewildered. She was pale, shaking her head as if to dispel a nightmare. George, too, looked like he'd been struck, his face draining of color, his eyes fixed on the floor. This can't be happening, my mom murmured, her voice barely audible. We can't, this wedding can't go on. Confused and starting to panic, I pressed. Mom, what are you talking about? What's going on? She finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. Naomi, this is too much. George is your father. We can't do this. The room fell silent instantly, the earlier noise dying down as if sucked away. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, everyone trying to grasp what they had just heard. Linda, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. George, what is she talking about? What is this nonsense? George couldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at the ground, his voice a tortured whisper. It's true, Linda. I was with Sarah before you. When she told me she was pregnant, I wasn't ready. I left her. I never knew. I never thought. Alex, who had been standing by my side, looked like he was going to crumble right there. Dad? You mean? Naomi and I are. He couldn't even finish the sentence, his face crumpling in despair. I felt numb, the shock too big to process. My fiancé, the man I loved, was my half-brother. It was like a twisted nightmare, except I was wide awake. Can't be together? Alex managed to choke out, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. Everything was collapsing around us. Our future, our plans, the life we'd imagined together, all tainted by a secret that should have come out decades ago. After the bombshell about my dad, the room felt like a pressure cooker about to blow. Confusion and shock were written on everyone's faces. That's when I remembered something crucial, those blood test results from before Alex's dad's surgery. I needed to make sense of everything, not just for me, but for everyone caught in this mess. Can everyone just stop for a moment? My voice cut through the murmurs, louder than I expected. All eyes turned to me. Linda, I said, looking directly at Alex's mom. I have to ask, why do you and Alex have different blood types? What's going on there? Linda's face went pale, her eyes darting around, looking for an out. She opened her mouth, then closed it, the words failing her as her husband turned to her, his expression hardening. Tell me the truth, Linda. Now. George's voice boomed across the room, his patience worn thin. She stumbled over her words, trying to grasp at any explanation that could save face. It's a misunderstanding, that's all. Naomi is trying to make a scandal where there isn't one. But just as she tried to deflect, her sister, who'd been silent until now, stood up. Her face was set, resolved, like she'd been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. No, Linda. I can't do this anymore. I won't cover for you, she said, her voice steady and carrying across the room. Linda was already pregnant when she married George. He isn't Alex's father. She lied to keep her secret. The room erupted into gasps and whispers, the guests turning to one another, their expressions a mix of disbelief and dismay. Linda tried to speak, tried to salvage her crumbling facade, but the truth was out, and it hit harder than anything else she could say. Is this true? George's voice cracked, the pain evident. Linda's silence was answer enough. Alex looked from his mother to his uncle, then back to me. The hurt in his eyes was almost too much to bear. Mom, how could you? His voice was a whisper, a plea for something, anything that might make sense of the chaos. Linda's facade finally crumbled, her defense weak and feeble. I thought it was best at the time. To protect everyone, she murmured, but her words fell flat, lost in the shock of her deceit. The room was thick with tension, everyone processing the revelations that had turned the night upside down. No one seemed to take Linda's side, the sympathy was with me, my mom, and strangely enough, with George, who'd been lied to just as much as anyone. As the evening wound down, the guests slowly began to leave, their whispers and looks of sympathy trailing behind them. Alex stayed by my side, his earlier joy replaced by a somber quiet. We'll figure this out, Naomi, he said finally, squeezing my hand. We're not alone in this. We have each other. Yeah, I managed to say, the weight of his words, both a comfort and a reminder of the complicated path ahead. Together, whatever that means now. The days following the engagement dinner felt like walking through a fog. Alex and I had decided to take some time to ourselves, to process everything. We weren't breaking up, but we couldn't pretend our relationship could go on the same either. It was one of those tough decisions that neither of us wanted but both knew was necessary. A week later, I met up with my mom and George at a quiet coffee shop. It was the first time we were talking since the big revelation. The air was thick with awkwardness as we sat down. George looked older, the lines on his face deeper, weighed down by guilt. I'm sorry, Naomi. I can't say it enough. If I'd just faced up to what I did back then, George's voice trailed off, his eyes not meeting mine. Yeah, well, you didn't. And here we are, I replied, not ready to offer forgiveness yet. You missed my whole life, and now things are a mess. I know, and I'm here to make whatever amends I can, George said earnestly. I've missed so much, and I regret that deeply. I want to be part of your life now, if you'll let me. I looked at my mom, who had been quietly sipping her coffee. Mom, what do you think? Can we even start to fix this? She set her cup down, her voice steady. I've had a lot of years to think about what happened. I was angry, so angry at George, for a long time. But holding on to that hasn't helped me, or you. If George is sincere, and I believe he is, maybe it's time we tried to move forward. Moving forward sounded good in theory, but it was hard to know where to start. Okay, let's say we try this. What does moving forward even look like? I asked, genuinely unsure. George leaned forward, his expression serious. For starters, I want to be there for you, however you need. And not just with words. Financially, emotionally, whatever gaps I can fill. It felt weird, considering letting George in after everything. But Mom seemed to think it was worth trying, and I trusted her more than anyone. And what about Linda and Alex? I had to ask, the question hanging over us. George's face clouded over. Linda and I are figuring things out. As for Alex, he's heartbroken, Naomi. He loves you. He wants to stay in your life, if you'll have him. My heart ached at the mention of Alex. I don't know how to be around him and not feel everything I felt before. But I don't want to lose him either. It's going to take some time. Take all the time you need, George assured. We'll go at whatever pace you set. After everything that happened, the dust finally settled, and the biggest surprise was that Alex and I found our way back to each other. Despite the unbelievable twists our lives had taken, our love proved resilient. We realized that no matter what, we couldn't imagine our lives apart. Eventually, we celebrated our wedding, surrounded by those who supported us through thick and thin, and it was genuinely the happiest day of my life. Life went on, and as for Alex's parents, they ended up divorcing. George, feeling betrayed by years of deception, left Linda without alimony or a share in the joint property. He was hurt deeply, but decided to channel his efforts into something positive by transferring all his property and business to Alex and me. Running the business has been a challenge, but Alex handles it like he was born for it, and I've never been prouder of him. Things between George and my mom, Sarah, are still tense. Mom never fully forgave him for leaving her all those years ago, and their interactions are mostly cordial and only for the sake of family harmony. It's not perfect, but they manage for our sakes. As for Linda, after the divorce, she moved to another city. We don't hear much from her, and she wasn't invited to the wedding. Honestly, neither Alex nor I want to rekindle that connection. It's better for everyone this way. Sitting in our backyard, Alex and I often talk about how our journey together has been anything but ordinary. Remember when we thought planning a wedding was going to be our biggest challenge? I joked one evening, sipping on my tea as the sun set beautifully in front of us. Alex laughed, wrapping an arm around me. Yeah, life threw us some curveballs, didn't it? But look at us now. Yeah, stronger than ever, I agreed, leaning into him. I wouldn't change a thing about our story. We've come to understand that life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. We've faced challenges that would have broken many, but here we are, living proof that what doesn't kill you really does make you stronger. Our story isn't just about the struggles, but also about overcoming them, about love finding a way, and about building a future together no matter what. I've always believed in making my own way, so living solo in this bustling city, just a stone's throw from where I work as an editor at a large book publishing, has been perfect for me. My folks, bless them, are just a phone call away, but here in the city, it's all on me. This one Saturday, needing a break from the usual, I decided to swap out manuscripts for some fresh air and headed to the nearby park. It's my go-to spot for some quiet, usually. I was lost in thought, maybe more than I should have been, because I didn't see the bike path up ahead. Watch out. That was the first thing he said to me. I jumped back, just in time as this guy on a bicycle screeched to a halt right where I would have been a second later. Jesus, lady, you trying to get yourself killed? He snapped, catching his breath. He was clearly annoyed but also seemed relieved that he hadn't hit me. I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking. Are you okay? I stammered, feeling like a complete fool. Yeah, I'm fine. No thanks to you, though. You gotta watch where you're going. His tone was harsh, but his concern seemed genuine. I know. I just zoned out. Thanks for stopping in time, I replied, feeling my cheeks heat up. He ran a hand through his hair, looking a bit calmer. All right, no harm done, I guess. But maybe keep off the bike lane, huh? Deal, I said, managing a small smile. I'm Jenna, by the way. Tom, he said, offering a hand, which I shook. So, Jenna, always this distracted, or is it just my lucky day? Only on Saturdays, I quipped back, feeling a bit more at ease. We both laughed, and somehow, that awkward start turned into coffee at the nearby cafe. Turns out, Tom worked at a car sales company. He was straightforward, kind of blunt, but funny. We talked about everything, from books, which he admitted he didn't read much of, to cars, which I knew nothing about. It was easy, simple conversation, the kind where you suddenly realize hours have passed. Didn't think I'd end up spending my afternoon with the woman who almost wrecked my bike, Tom said as we stood up to leave. And I didn't think I'd be thanking the same guy who called me a killer on our first chat. I shot back, laughing. Well, guess we're both full of surprises. Can I see you again, Jenna? Maybe on a day when you're not in the path of moving vehicles? I nodded, smiling. I think I can arrange that. Over the next few weeks, Tom and I started seeing each other more often. At first, it was just casual coffee dates and walks through different parts of the city. He had a rough way of talking, but it grew on me, felt real and down to earth. Before I knew it, these friendly meetups turned into late-night talks, dinners at places that became our spots, and slow, revealing conversations about our lives. There was something about Tom that felt familiar and exciting at the same time. I was drawn to his blunt charm, and from those ordinary meetings, an affair began. The more things progressed with Tom, the more inevitable it became that I'd meet his folks. They lived in the suburbs, a nice big house with a yard and all. Tom had warned me his mom was a bit traditional, but I wasn't prepared for just how much. We pulled up to their house, and right from the start, it was clear his parents had been eagerly waiting for us. His mom, a robust lady with a warm smile, welcomed us at the door, enveloping Tom in a big hug and giving me a once-over that felt a bit too long. Jenna, dear, it's so nice to finally meet you. Tom has told us so much about you, she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like she was trying to figure out my dress size than welcome me. Thanks, Mrs. Harper, it's great to meet you too, I replied, trying to match her warmth. We sat down in the living room, and Mrs. Harper wasted no time diving into the conversation. So, Jenna, Tom tells us you work at a publishing house. That must be exciting, handling books all day. It is, Mrs. Harper. I love my job. It's fulfilling to be part of the creative process, I said, glancing at Tom, hoping he'd help steer the conversation. That's nice, dear. But you know, once you two settle down, you'll need to think about what's really important. Family should come first, and a woman's touch in the home is irreplaceable, she said, not missing a beat. Tom's dad, who had been quietly observing the exchange, chimed in with a nod. Absolutely. A stable home is the foundation of a good life. Right, son? Tom shifted uncomfortably but managed a nod. Yeah, Mom, Jenna's really great at managing her time though. She's pretty organized and sharp. Well, of course, but managing a home is different, you know. It's a full-time commitment, his mom countered, fixing her gaze on me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I cleared my throat, feeling the need to defend my position. I believe it's possible to balance both, Mrs. Harper. I think a modern family can have two working parents. It's all about teamwork, isn't it? Mrs. Harper smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, dear, that's a nice thought. But in reality, children need their mother. And a house needs a woman's touch, not just a quick sweep. The conversation drifted to other things, but the seed had been planted. Dinner was served, and it was like sitting in a minefield. Every compliment about the food felt like a veiled suggestion for me to take notes. Jenna, do you cook often? Mrs. Harper asked as she served a perfectly roasted chicken. Sometimes, when I can. Work keeps me pretty busy, I replied, trying to keep it light. Ah, well, you'll find great satisfaction in keeping your family fed and your house in order. There's a rhythm to it that's quite fulfilling, she explained, passing the mashed potatoes like she was handing down wisdom. Tom kicked me under the table lightly, a silent signal to not get riled up. I just smiled, sipping my wine a bit more than usual, thinking about how this dinner was more an interview than a meal. Tom and I decided to tie the knot after a year of dating. Despite the reservations I had from meeting his parents, love, as they say, makes you hopeful. We planned a modest wedding, just close family and friends, nothing fancy, just how we both wanted it, or so I thought. The wedding day was a blur of smiles, flowers, and a small crowd of well-wishers at a local community hall we'd booked. It was quaint, draped in simple decorations, and there was an air of excitement, or maybe that was just my nerves. The ceremony was short and sweet. We exchanged vows, rings, and a kiss that sealed the deal. Everyone clapped, and it felt right, at that moment at least. At the reception, while we were munching on finger food, Tom leaned over and said, "So, I was thinking about our next steps, about moving into a bigger place." I nodded, munching on a celery stick. "Sure, we talked about needing more space." "What did you find?" "There's this great apartment, bigger and really nice. It's actually near where I grew up," he added, watching my reaction closely. "Near your parents?" I asked, trying not to sound too concerned. "Yeah, it's convenient, and Mom and Dad would be thrilled to have us close by. Plus, Dad mentioned he could help us out with the rent for a bit." I paused, thinking about the constant visits from his mom I'd have to endure. "That's generous. But, Tom, you know how I value our independence. I don't want to feel like we're not on our own." Tom squeezed my hand. "I get it, Jenna, but think about it. It's a good financial move, and it'll be nice to have family nearby, you know, for when we decide to start our own." I wasn't convinced, but decided to give it a shot. "Okay, we can try it. But if it feels too crowded, we need to reconsider, alright?" "Deal." Tom smiled, and we went back to entertaining our guests. Moving in was a hassle. The apartment was indeed spacious and had a lovely view of a nearby park, but it was also a 40-minute drive from my work, which added to my daily commute. Tom's parents, true to form, were over often. His mom came by with housewarming gifts, which were really just ways to imprint her taste on our decor. "Jenna, dear, I brought you some nice curtains, much better than those drab ones you picked out," she said one afternoon, holding up a garish set of floral curtains. "Thanks, Mrs. Harper, but I actually like the ones we have." I tried to keep my tone light. "Oh, but these will brighten up the living room so much more," she insisted, already walking over to change them. The tension was palpable each time she visited, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Tom did his best to mediate, but it was clear that his idea of close to family and mine were worlds apart. Over time, the topic of how we should live our lives began cropping up more frequently. Tom increasingly expressed his preference for traditional family roles. "Jen, think about it. You managing the home, me bringing in the cash, it just makes sense," he'd argue, his voice firm as if that settled the matter. "But look at this," I'd respond, pulling up our budget on my laptop. "Two incomes, especially now with everything that's going on, pandemics, economic dips, it just makes more sense. We're more secure this way." Tom would shake his head, clearly frustrated. "That's not how a family should work. It's not just about money, Jenna. But it is about stability, Tom. And us both working doesn't mean we can't have a great home life." I tried to reason, but it felt like talking to a wall. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harper practically turned our apartment into her second home. She was over all the time, and every visit felt like an inspection. "Jenna, you're not thinking of staying in that job forever, are you?" she'd start as soon as she walked in. I'd barely have my coat off, and there she was, questioning my life choices. "I actually enjoy my work, Mrs. Harper. It's important to me," I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady and polite. She'd tisk and start prowling around the apartment, her fingers sliding over surfaces, looking for dust. "Well, if you were home more, maybe this place would be cleaner," she'd say, holding up her dusty finger like it was evidence in a trial. "It's clean enough. We live here, it's not a museum," I'd shoot back, feeling my patience thinning. But she'd already be on to her next inspection point, flinging open the refrigerator to critique my grocery choices. "This isn't enough food for a healthy meal. And look at these leftovers, don't you cook fresh?" she'd complain, her nose wrinkling in disapproval. I tried talking to Tom about it. "Your mom is overstepping, and it's stressing me out. I can't keep up with her expectations." Tom, ever the peacemaker, would sigh. "She's just trying to help, Jenna. Maybe if you were home more, things wouldn't be so tense." One evening, after a particularly hard day at work, I came home to find Tom in a foul mood. "This place is a mess, Jenna. And dinner's it's not up to par," he said, poking disdainfully at the pasta I had whipped up. "I'm doing my best, Tom. I'm working full-time and trying to keep up with the house. But it's never good enough for you, or your mom," I snapped, frustration boiling over. "Well, maybe if you weren't trying to do both, you'd actually do one right," he shot back, his words sharp and cutting. I was taken aback. "Are you saying I need to choose between my job and our home? If you can't handle both, then yes. Maybe you should just be a housewife. Honestly, if things don't change, I don't see how this can work out," he threatened, his tone cold and serious. I felt a chill run down my spine. The man I loved was giving me an ultimatum that felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Be a housewife or bust. It was clear that the life I had built, my career, my independence, was slipping through my fingers the more I tried to cling to it. The tension in our home was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tom and I were at a breaking point over my career and our lifestyle. I loved him deeply, so I made a choice that I thought could smooth things over. I went to my boss and laid it out. I was quitting to be a full-time housewife. My boss was shocked, disappointed even. He knew how much my career meant to me. But then he offered a lifeline, remote work. I could still edit, only from home. It wasn't ideal, but it felt like a compromise I could live with without completely losing myself. I didn't tell Tom about the remote work arrangement. Instead, I told him I had quit my job to focus on our home. His face lit up in a way that both warmed and broke my heart. "That's great, Jen. It'll be better for us, you'll see," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like he was clinging to a newfound peace of mind. I threw myself into the role of housewife, handling the chores, cooking meals, and making sure everything was just right for when he came home from work. But as soon as he left for work each morning, my laptop opened, and I was back at my editor's desk, remotely. The balance was precarious, juggling my secret work life with the domestic life Tom believed I had embraced. I funneled the money I earned into a separate account. It seemed smarter to have a financial cushion that Tom didn't know about, just in case. Living on just Tom's salary was his idea, and it strained our finances more than he realized. Just 3 months in, the cracks began to show. "We're running low on everything, Tom. We need to rethink our budget." I approached the topic one evening, hoping for a rational conversation. "What are you talking about? You're just not managing our money right. You need to cut back on spending," he snapped back, frustration lacing his words. His words stung. I hadn't bought anything for myself in ages, always hunting for deals and scrimping wherever I could. I'd been as frugal as possible. "It's not enough," I insisted, my voice tight with hurt. The next day, as if on cue, Mrs. Harper showed up at our door. "Tom told me you're having trouble with the budget. Let me show you how to shop properly," she declared, her tone brooking no argument. The following days were a crash course in extreme penny pinching. She dragged me to the store, pointing out the cheapest items, many of which were of questionable quality. "These are what you should be buying, Jenna. None of that fancy stuff," she instructed, her voice harsh as if I was a wayward child. She even showed me how to dilute dish soap to make it last longer, her eyes sharp. "You'll learn to make do with less. It's good for you," she said, nodding to herself more than to me. Every receipt was scrutinized, every expenditure questioned. "Why did you buy this? You don't need to be traveling around when there's work to be done here," she scolded when she saw a bus ticket stub. It was more than just saving money, it felt demeaning, like I was under constant surveillance. Living this way, under the strict rules dictated by Tom and enforced by his mother, was stifling. One afternoon, I locked myself in the bedroom and called my mom. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore," I started, my voice cracking a bit as I explained how Mrs. Harper had been teaching me to stretch every dollar to the extreme, making me feel like I was living in the Great Depression. "That's not normal, Jenna," my mom said firmly. "You're supposed to be partners. It sounds like she's trying to control everything. And Tom should not be letting this happen." I sighed, feeling a small wave of relief just hearing her say it. "I know, Mom. It's just so hard. I try to stand up for myself, but it always turns into a huge fight." Just as I was about to say more, the bedroom door swung open. Tom stood there, his face twisted in anger. He had overheard me. Without a word, he marched over, grabbed the phone from my hand, and ended the call. "A wife shouldn't be complaining about her husband and mother-in-law like some kind of traitor," he snapped, his voice cold and harsh. I was stunned. "Tom, I was talking to my mom. I needed someone to talk to." "That doesn't give you the right to badmouth us. Especially not to your mother," he retorted, his eyes narrowing. The argument spiraled from there, voices raised, words that couldn't be taken back. In a huff, Tom stormed out, slamming the door behind him. He was gone for the rest of the day, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which were a tangled mess of sadness and frustration. It was well past midnight when I heard the key turn in the lock. Tom stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. His usual stern demeanor was replaced by a sloppy, cruel drunkenness. "I should have listened to my mom. She warned me about marrying someone like you," he slurred, his words like daggers. I stood up, my own anger rising. "Tom, you're a grown man. Stop letting your mother run our lives. You don't need her approval for every little thing." That seemed to set him off even more. "If you're so unhappy, why don't you just leave?" he yelled, stepping close, his voice booming in the confined space of our apartment. "It's 3 a.m., Tom. It's not safe," I replied, trying to reason with him even as my voice shook. "I don't care. Get out," he shouted, not even looking at me. I hesitated only for a moment before I started to pack the essentials, my phone, some clothes. When I went to grab my wallet, Tom snatched it from my hands. "I earned this money, Jenna. You have no right to it," he said, venom in his tone. Panic surged through me, but then I remembered my own account, my secret safety net. I called a taxi and left without looking back, Tom's angry shouts fading behind me as I closed the door. I found a temporary shelter in a nearby hotel. The morning after leaving Tom, I was up early, my mind racing with all that needed to be done. The first stop was a lawyer's office. It was a small, unassuming place, but the lawyer, Mr. Edwards, was sharp and kind. He listened as I laid out everything that had happened, nodding in understanding. "We'll get the divorce papers drawn up right away. You have rights, Jenna, and we'll make sure you're protected," Mr. Edwards assured me, his voice firm and confident. Armed with my newly drafted divorce papers, I returned to the apartment where Tom and I had lived. The place was silent, the remnants of last night's chaos evident in the strewn bottles and Tom's snoring form on the couch. He hadn't even made it to the bedroom. I began packing my things quickly, stuffing clothes, books, and personal items into boxes and bags. The reality of leaving this chapter behind felt both liberating and heavy. As I zipped up the last suitcase, Tom stirred on the couch. "Jenna? Hey, can you grab me a beer?" he mumbled, still half asleep, not even noticing the suitcases. Instead of a beer, I placed the divorce papers on the coffee table in front of him. "Here's what I can give you," I said, my voice steady. Tom blinked, slowly coming to. He picked up the papers, scanning them, a smirk appearing on his face. "What's this? You're serious? Come on, Jen. You'll come back. Just say sorry to me and my mom, promise to follow the rules, and we can forget all this." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. No, Tom. I'm not coming back. Not now, not ever. This is goodbye. I left the apartment, the door closing behind me with a click that sounded like the locking of my past. I moved into a rented apartment that afternoon, a small place, but mine alone. Returning to work full-time at the office felt like stepping back into a world where I was in control. The familiar buzz of the office, the clack of keyboards, and the scent of coffee brewing, everything reminded me why I loved my job. I also reconnected with my friends and my parents, rebuilding the bridges that had been strained during my turbulent marriage. Catching up over long dinners and weekend brunches, I shared laughs and stories, feeling the strength of these relationships that had weathered so much. One late afternoon, as I was wrapping up a manuscript, my phone buzzed. Glancing at the screen, I saw a name I hadn't expected, Claire, a close friend from the city who had been my sounding board through the worst of times. "Hey Claire, what's up?" I answered, smiling as I heard her enthusiastic voice. "Jenna, I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, a few of us are getting together this weekend at that new cafe downtown. You have to come. It's been ages, and everyone's dying to see you." The cafe meetup turned out to be just what I needed. Laughter, updates, and a gentle nudge back into the social world. It felt good to be among friends, to share stories and listen to theirs, feeling the camaraderie that I'd missed. As the gathering wound down, Claire caught me by the arm as we were leaving. "Hey, how are you really doing, Jen?" she asked, her gaze piercing, but kind. I took a deep breath, letting the truth surface. "I'm getting there, Claire. It's been tough, but I think I'm finally moving forward for real." A few months into my new old life, my phone rang while I was reviewing a particularly challenging manuscript. The screen flashed Tom's name. Taking a deep breath, I answered, my voice cool and collected. "Jenna, hey, I need to talk to you." Tom's voice came through, hesitant and a bit desperate. "What is it, Tom?" I asked, not really in the mood for pleasantries. "Well, I got fired," he blurted out. "And things are tight. I was wondering." "You need money." I finished for him, not surprised by the turn of the conversation. "Yeah. And, well, I was thinking maybe we could start over, you know? If you apologize to my mom and me, and we could try again. You could take care of us." His voice was hopeful, almost pleading. I couldn't help it, I burst into laughter. The idea was so ludicrous it took me a moment to gather myself. "Tom, you're joking, right? You want me to apologize, support you, and come back to all that mess? You've ditched your principles pretty fast, haven't you?" There was a silence on the other end. "So, is that a no?" "Yes, Tom, that's a no. A big one," I replied, still chuckling at the absurdity. "I'm doing well, really well actually, and I'm not about to give up my freedom and happiness for another round of whatever that was." Hanging up, I shook my head in disbelief. The call was a stark reminder of how far I had come and how much I had changed. I was free, truly free, and it felt liberating. I turned back to my manuscript, a smile playing on my lips. The idea of jumping back into a relationship wasn't appealing at the moment. I was enjoying my independence too much, savoring the peace that came with it. It was just another Friday night, and there I was, sprawled on my couch, buried under a pile of investment portfolios that needed reviewing by Monday. My phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table, breaking my concentration for the umpteenth time that evening. The screen lit up with a message from Jess, my best friend since college and a perpetual source of chaos in my otherwise orderly life. "Ella, you better not be working tonight. We've got plans, remember?" Jess's text read, a hint of a threat underlying her playful tone. I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose, before typing a reluctant reply. "I remember, Jess. Just let me finish this last section." "Where are you dragging me to again?" "Quit your grumbling. It's that new Quest game downtown. It's gonna be epic. Plus, you need a break. Work can wait." She responded almost immediately, her impatience palpable even through text. I met Jess and the rest of the gang at the lobby of Mystery Manor, a place that looked more like a haunted house than a fun night out. The game host briefed us on the rules and the backstory of our adventure. We were to solve a series of puzzles to escape the manor, and our group was not the only one participating that night. As we were divided into teams, I found myself paired with a guy named Tom. He was from another company, a fact I only gleaned because his work badge was still clipped to his jeans. Tom seemed just as out of place as I felt, his hands tucked awkwardly into his pockets as he offered me a shy smile. "So, not really your scene either?" I ventured, trying to break the ice as we approached our first clue. Tom chuckled, his smile reaching his eyes. "You could say that. I got roped into this by my sister. She thinks I need to get out more." "Sounds like we're in the same boat. My friend thinks this will cure my workaholism," I replied, rolling my eyes. We spent the next hour navigating through cobwebbed corridors and solving riddles that designed to confuse rather than enlighten. Tom proved to be surprisingly insightful, his quiet demeanor belying a sharp wit that caught me off guard more than once. "You're pretty good at this," I noted as he unlocked a particularly tricky cipher that had stumped me. He shrugged, a small grin tugging at his lips. "I like puzzles. Keeps the mind sharp. How about you? What's your excuse for being so quick with these clues?" "Just a lot of practice with problem solving at work, I guess. Investment decisions aren't so different from puzzles, just with higher stakes," I explained, warming up to him as we delved deeper into the game. As we cracked the last code and escaped the manor, Tom turned to me, his eyes bright with excitement. "That was actually fun. Thanks for being such a great team partner, Ella." "No, thank you. I was dreading tonight, but this turned out to be a blast," I admitted, feeling a strange reluctance at the night coming to an end. We exchanged numbers, a move that surprised me more than it probably should have. As I watched Tom disappear into the night, a part of me hoped this wouldn't be the last I saw of him. After that quirky night at the escape room, things with Tom picked up speed faster than I ever expected. We started seeing each other regularly, finding comfort in our shared love for dry humor and disdain for unnecessary social gatherings. When I first met Tom's family, I was nervous, wondering if they'd accept me. His parents were instantly welcoming, warm smiles and hearty hugs making me feel right at home. But Karen, Tom's older sister, was another story entirely. Right from the start, she sized me up with a look that could chill a glass of beer. "So you're the one Tom's been all crazy about," she said with a sneer, her tone dripping with something less than enthusiasm. Life after marriage felt like stepping onto a fast-moving train. Just a few months in, and we were already on to our next big adventure, pregnancy. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. Holding down a demanding job while growing a human inside me? Yeah, it sounded like a plot for disaster. But Tom was a rock, always there with his unshakable calm. "Hey, you're going to be an amazing mom," Tom reassured me one evening as we sat on our couch, my feet in his lap after a particularly rough day. "And don't worry about work. We'll figure it out together." "Yeah, I know, but you've seen me with plants, Tom. They barely survive a week," I quipped, trying to mask my anxiety with humor. The pregnancy wasn't kind to me. Every morning was a battle against nausea. I remember one meeting where I had to excuse myself every half hour, rushing to the restroom while my colleagues waited patiently. The day of the delivery was a blur of pain and panic. I clung to Tom's hand, the only anchor I had as the waves of contractions tried to pull me under. The doctors buzzed around, their faces tense as they monitored the situation. It wasn't going well. "Mrs. Carter, we need to do an emergency C-section. It's the best chance for your baby," the lead doctor finally said, looking me straight in the eye as if willing me to understand the gravity of the situation. I barely nodded, my body racked with another painful contraction, as they wheeled me into the operating room. The last thing I remember was Tom's voice, soft and steady, telling me he loved me. When I woke up, the room was silent. The kind of silence that suffocates. Tom was there, his face pale and strained. He took my hand, tears brimming in his eyes, but not falling. "Ella, I'm so sorry. We lost him." The world stopped. No, that's not quite right. It shattered, a million pieces of me scattering to the wind. Our baby boy, the little life we had dreamed of and prepared for, gone before he even had a chance to cry, to see the world, to know how much he was loved. The doctors were kind but firm. "You won't be able to conceive again," they told us after a battery of tests. It was clinical, the finality of it, but nothing about that moment felt clinical to me. It felt like another loss, a future stolen from us. Tom and I went home, to a house filled with unopened baby gifts and a nursery that would remain empty. 5 years have passed since then. Tom's mom had passed away last year, and the old man was getting more and more withdrawn, spending days by himself in that big, echoing house. Tom and I had a long talk over some seriously strong coffee one Saturday morning. "We can't just leave him like this, Ella. It's not right," Tom said, running his hands through his hair, looking all worn and worried. I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee, feeling it bitter and hot down my throat. "I know, babe. It makes sense. Let's move in for a while, help him out. It'll be good, being together." Tom gave me this grateful look, like I'd just lifted 100 pounds off his shoulders. So, we packed up our stuff, not much, and by the following weekend, we were setting up in his dad's guest rooms. The first evening we moved in, the air was cool and the house smelled like lavender and old books. We were just about to have dinner, the three of us, when there was a loud banging on the door. It was Karen, of course, coming in with her usual flair for drama, her 2 kids trailing behind her like lost puppies. "What's this all about then? Moving in on Dad, now that Mom's gone?" she snapped as soon as she stepped in, not even a hello. She dropped her purse loudly on the table, her eyes darting around like she was looking for hidden treasure. "Karen, calm down. We're just trying to help Dad, not take over," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. It was hard, though, with her staring me down like I'd stolen something. Tom's dad shuffled into the room, his face lighting up seeing the kids. "Karen, let it be. They're here to help, and I'm glad for it. Sit down, have some dinner." She huffed, plopping down at the table, still eyeing me suspiciously. "Just seems mighty convenient, that's all. Mom's barely cold and here you are." Dinner was tense after that. I tried making small talk, asking the kids about school, but Karen kept drumming her fingers on the table, her eyes sharp and calculating. After we ate, she pulled Tom aside, whispering fiercely enough that I caught snatches of it. "Not right, taking advantage, always the saint, aren't you?" Tom's reply was too low for me to hear, but from the set of his jaw, I knew he was holding back a storm. When they finished, Karen grabbed her kids and stormed out, not even a goodbye to her dad. Later, cleaning up the dishes, Tom's dad put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't mind her, Ella. She's always been fiery. You're doing a good thing here." I smiled, wiping down the counter. "Thanks, Dad. It means a lot, hearing that from you." Despite the tension with Karen, life at Tom's dad's house settled into a routine. I kept up with my job, the days long but fulfilling. Evenings and weekends were our time to breathe a bit, with Tom, his dad, and me trying to make the best out of our days together. His dad, recovering from his grief and loneliness, seemed genuinely thankful for our company. He started treating me like a daughter than a daughter-in-law, always making sure I felt welcomed and valued. "Thank you, Ella, for everything. This house felt too big and too empty without your laughter," he'd tell me as we'd sit down to dinner, a simple meal brightened by the warmth of family. But while one relationship grew stronger, another spiraled further into cold hostility. Karen's attitude towards me shifted from mere disdain to outright hostility. Whenever we were alone, without Tom or his dad around, she'd unleash her bitterness. One afternoon, I was tidying up the living room when Karen dropped by. As usual, her entrance was quiet, almost stealthy, knowing that her father and Tom were out. "Ella, still playing the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, I see. she sneered as she walked in, her eyes scanning the room like she might find something amiss. I straightened up, facing her. "Karen, I'm not playing at anything. I'm here because I care." Karen laughed, a harsh sound that echoed a bit too sharply against the walls. "Care? Or are you just securing your future here, since you can't have your own family?" The words stung, more than I wanted to admit. "That's a low blow, Karen. Why do you have to make it personal?" "Because it is personal, Ella. You're here, playing house, while knowing you'll never continue the family line. My kids are the real heirs. You're just occupying space." I took a deep breath, clenching my fists to keep calm. "Karen, I'm here because your father and Tom need me. We're family now, whether you like it or not." She scoffed, stepping closer. "Family? You think just because you married my brother and moved in here, you're family? You'll never really be one of us." Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and left, her words hanging heavy in the air. Later that evening, when Tom and his dad came back, Karen transformed like she always did. Smiling, engaging, and utterly flawless in her role as the devoted daughter. It was as if our earlier confrontation had never happened. At dinner, she talked animatedly about her children's school activities, weaving herself back into the fabric of the family with practiced ease. I watched her, marveling at the stark difference in her demeanor. Tom, catching my eye, gave me a small, knowing look. He squeezed my hand under the table, a silent message of solidarity. After dinner, while washing up, Tom leaned in. "I saw that look during dinner. Did something happen with Karen today?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, the usual." Her words. "Tom, they do hurt." Tom frowned, his features hardening. "I know, Ella. I'm sorry. I wish she'd see what she's doing to us. But listen, you are part of this family. Don't ever doubt that." This year, I decided to keep my birthday low-key, celebrating it quietly at my father-in-law's house with just the close family. It felt right, more like a gathering of warmth and comfort, something I craved more as each year passed. Karen and her family were the last to arrive. As soon as she stepped through the door, she thrust her 2 kids towards me with a smirk, saying, "Here, Ella, I'm sure you're not tired of kids yet. It'll do you good to feel like a full-fledged woman for a change." I bit back the sharp retort that sprang to my lips, choosing instead to smile and usher the children inside, not wanting to start my birthday with a confrontation. Dinner was a lively affair with chatter and laughter, at least on the surface. Karen passed me a gift, a small, elegantly wrapped box. "Why don't you open this later, in your room? When no one will bother you," she whispered, her voice dripping with false sweetness that sent a ripple of anxiety through me. I nodded, tucking the box beside me, my smile fixed. The meal progressed, and just as I was starting to relax, Karen's youngest son, sitting on my lap, looked up at me with innocent eyes and asked loudly, "What does infertile mean?" "Mommy said that's what you are." The words hung heavy in the air, a suffocating silence falling over the table. I froze, words lodged in my throat, the room suddenly feeling too tight. Tom was quick to intervene, his voice calm but firm as he redirected the conversation to a safer topic. I barely heard the words, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. Excusing myself under the pretense of needing to freshen up, I escaped to the sanctuary of the next room. My hands were shaking as I pulled Karen's gift from the folds of my napkin. The unease I'd felt earlier blossomed into full-blown dread as I unwrapped it. Inside the box was a small doll, a grotesque mimicry of a newborn, smeared with what looked like blood. Attached was a note, cruel and heartless. "Maybe now you'll remember what you did to your child." A gasp escaped me, and my hands trembled violently. "Tom," I called out, my voice breaking with panic and grief. Tom rushed in, his face blanching as he saw the contents of the box in my hands. Without a word, he enveloped me in his arms, taking the doll and the note from my shaking hands, his own expression one of horror and fury. "I'm so sorry, Ella. I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "This is unforgivable. As I clung to him, the walls I had built to hold back my grief crumbled. This was supposed to be a simple birthday celebration, a day of joy, and it had turned into a reminder of the deepest pain I carried. Tom, pale with fury, clutched the small doll and the cruel note his sister had given me. Without a word, he stormed into the living room, where everyone was still gathered, chatting idly. "Look at this. Look at what Karen thought was an appropriate birthday gift for my wife." Tom's voice boomed, shaking with anger as he thrust the doll and the note into the center of the room. The chatter ceased instantly, everyone's eyes widening in shock as they processed the gruesome symbol and the hateful words. "This is beyond sick, Karen," Tom yelled, turning to face his sister, who stood frozen, her face a mask of feigned confusion and defiance. Karen started, but Tom cut her off. "No. I don't want to hear your excuses. How could you be so heartless? You're my sister, but I can't even look at you right now. You're not part of this family if this is how you treat people. You're done here," he shouted, his words slicing through the tense air. Dad, who had been silent, his face a growing shade of red from anger, finally spoke up, his voice thundering. "Karen, get out of my house. I don't want to know you anymore. To think I raised someone capable of this." Karen, still clutching at some shred of pride, scoffed and headed towards the door. Once outside, she turned back, a sneer distorting her face. "Fine. But when he's gone, who do you think will inherit all this? My children are still his grandchildren." The audacity of her words struck us silent. We watched, stunned, as she walked to her car where her husband was waiting. Their voices carried back to us, the sharp sound of a heated argument breaking the cold night air. "You idiot! Do you realize what you've just done?" her husband's voice echoed through the parking lot. "Oh, shut up. It's not my fault they can't take a joke," Karen shot back, her voice shrill. Their children, forgotten in the commotion, stood by the doorstep, small and confused. My heart broke for them, witnessing such ugliness. Tom, his father, and I stood by the open door, the cold breeze sweeping in, mingling with the harsh words floating from the parking lot. None of us could find the words to speak. We simply stood there, the door eventually closing with a soft click that sounded final. Inside, the house felt emptier, the echo of the confrontation hanging in every corner. Dad put his arm around me, his old, tired eyes wet with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry, Ella. That anyone, let alone my own daughter, could do this." His voice trailed off, choked with emotion. Tom stood by, his jaw clenched, his usual warmth replaced by a cold fury. After a moment, he turned to me, his expression softening. "Ella, I'm so sorry. This should have been a happy occasion. I promise, we'll make this right. Somehow." A few months after that tumultuous birthday, things took another turn. We found out that Karen's husband had left her. He'd been banking on a hefty inheritance from Dad and couldn't handle the fallout of being cut off. Worse yet, Karen started drinking heavily, spiraling down so fast that she eventually lost her rights to see her kids. It was a mess, and those poor kids were stuck in the middle of it. One evening, after Tom and I had put the kids to bed in our guest room, they'd been staying with us temporarily, I brought up the subject that had been weighing on my mind. We were in the kitchen, Tom making a late cup of tea for us. "Tom, we need to talk about your niece and nephew. This situation isn't getting any better, and they need stability," I said, leaning against the counter. Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I've been thinking about that too. They're already like family to us. Maybe we should make it official?" I was thinking the same thing. "How do you feel about us becoming their legal guardians?" I asked, watching his reaction closely. He paused, then nodded firmly. "Let's do it. They need us, and I want them to grow up in a loving home. They've been through enough already." We decided to move forward with it, and after a series of meetings with social services and seemingly endless paperwork, we were granted custody of the kids. They were officially part of our family now, and their bright smiles made every bit of bureaucracy worth it. Dad was overjoyed when we told him the news. "I've got enough rooms in this big old house for all of you," he declared one afternoon as we all sat in the living room, a puzzle spread out on the coffee table. "Why don't you all move in permanently? Make it official." Tom and I exchanged a look, the idea having already crossed our minds. "We were hoping you'd say that, Dad. We'd love to," Tom responded, his voice steady, but I could hear the emotion just under the surface. "Good. It's settled then. This house should be filled with family, with laughter and love," Dad said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "Let's turn this place into a home again." That night, after tucking the kids into their new permanent rooms, Tom and I stood in the doorway of what used to be a guest room, now brightly decorated with posters and toys. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Tom said, wrapping an arm around my waist. "It feels right," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. "This house, these kids, your dad, this is family." Life in the big, old house was bustling now, filled with the sounds of children playing and the constant hum of family life. It was a Sunday morning, and the smell of bacon filled the air as I helped the kids set the table for a big family breakfast. "Can I carry the syrup, Mom?" Sammy, the younger one, asked, his eyes wide with the responsibility of the task. "Sure, but be careful. It's sticky, and we don't want to end up eating pancakes with syrup flour," I teased him, handing him the bottle. He nodded solemnly and walked as if he was balancing a pot of gold, his concentration comical. Jenny, his older sister, rolled her eyes at her brother's careful steps. "If you go any slower, we'll have to eat lunch instead of breakfast." Tom chuckled as he flipped another pancake. "Let him be, Jenny. He's doing a great job." As we settled around the table, Tom's dad, who we'd all started affectionately calling Grandpa, took his usual seat at the head of the table, looking around with a content smile. "I can't remember the last time this table was this full." "It's because of Ella," Tom said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "She's the one who's made this house a home again." I felt my cheeks warm with the compliment. "It's all of us, not just me. We're a team, right?" I said, looking around the table at the faces I'd come to love more than I could have imagined. "That's right," Grandpa said, nodding. "But you, my dear, you brought us back together when things were pretty tough. You've got a way of doing that." Later that day, while the kids were playing in the yard, Grandpa called us into the living room. He had a serious look about him, one we'd come to recognize as his announcement face. "I've been thinking," he started, "about this house and everything in it. I've decided to put it in trust for the kids. For their future." Tom and I exchanged surprised glances. "Dad, are you sure? That's a big decision," Tom said. "I've never been sure about anything. This house should stay in the family, and who better to keep it alive than those kids?" Grandpa said, his voice firm. "And Ella," he added, looking at me with a soft smile, "I want you to manage it until they're old enough. You've made it a home once, and I trust you'll keep it that way." I was touched, overwhelmed by his trust and generosity. "Thank you, I'd be honored," I managed to say, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility settle over me. As the day wound down, and I watched the kids chase each other around the garden, the laughter filling the air, I felt a deep sense of peace. Tom came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Looks like we did all right, huh?" "We did more than all right," I replied, leaning back into his embrace. "We made a family." And as the sun set over our home, I knew that no matter what the future held, we had built something enduring here, something that would last, carried forward not just by blood but by the love we shared.